Good afternoon. Today is February 21st, and welcome to the Ways and Means Committee hearings. Folks, when I call your bill number, please step front, and everyone will be timed for 2 minutes except for the sponsors. But if you go on and on, you may be timed for 2 minutes. And with that, we will begin with House Bill 648, Delegate Heinbaugh. Oh, perfect. Back row caucus.
Delegate Buckle pronounced. Thank you.
Oh, I'm scared to ask how he pronounced it. Whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to come in and testify in support of House Bill 648. This should be relatively quick and straightforward, but we'll see. For the record, I'm Delegate Jim Heinbaugh. I represent District 1A, which includes all of Garrett County and the western part of Allegheny County. This bill, as I said, is pretty straightforward. It basically proposes to change what Garrett County can charge in the way of an auctioneer's fee with tax sales. Right now, the code limits Garrett County to charging $8. That $8, of course, is passed on to the buyer at the tax sale. This change, and actually, the auctioneer fee is currently $10. So this legislation would change the code so that Garrett County could charge $10, which is the full auctioneer's fee, and pass that fee on to the buyer. This bill was requested by the Garrett County Commissioners. It has no fiscal impact on the state at all, and quite frankly, it has a pretty minimal financial benefit to the county. However, it's part of overall attempt, a commendable attempt, I think, on the part of the county's finance officer to try to bring fees in line with actual cost. I think he picked a really easy one. I think they'll be much tougher from here on out. Basically, that's the bill and what the bill is all about, and that concludes my testimony, subject to any questions you might have.
I actually have a really important question. Could you please let us know what the delegation vote on this was?
It was unanimous.
And how many members in your delegation?
I am the delegation. That's me.
Awesome, perfect.
One of these days, when we're in session in the House, I'm going to stand up and give the Garrett County delegation report or announce a meeting. So I do understand one of my responsibilities I inherited from Delegate Beitzel, and then prior to that time, Senator Edwards and Delegate Edwards is the annual snow report.
Yes.
I'm not going to have much to report this year. It's going to be 70 degrees up there on Thursday, so we haven't had a lot of snow.
Yes. Well, we look forward to that on the floor. Any questions? Any legit questions? Okay, thank you. And that concludes the hearing on House Bill 648.
Thank you for your time and consideration. I appreciate it.
Thank you. House Bill 597, St. Mary's County Bill. Delegate Morgan, come on down.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ways and Means Committee. I told you see a lot of me this session with a lot of these local bills. Being a commissioner of county, I'm going to be in front of you all a lot. So I'm back again. So we have a Bill 597 dealing with the commissioner's election method. It's a straw ballot question. Taking a voter referendum to the people of St. Mary's. Ask them how they feel about their election districts. I know this committee just got finished hearing a bill hearing about a week and a half ago over Delegate Crosby's bill, HB 447. People that have been on this committee are in the General Assembly the last couple years. I know the Madam Vice Chair knows this very well. The old House 655 that we debated, I think, on the floor for like 4 days. So why am I here, right? What's the reason? And I was always told when you put a piece of legislation in, you try to say, what problem are you solving? And the problem is that we've had this bill put in there a couple times. This is the second year, calling for single-member districts in commissioner counties. Districts where the county is divided up by districts based on geographical regions, requiring commissioners to live in those regions, but is really voted on by the entire county. And that's come under some fire. I've watched the bill hearing a couple weeks ago in Ways and Means over House Bill 447. And look, majority of the people that are having a problem with this type of voting seems to be centered around one county, the county that I represent, St. Mary's County. So we drafted up a ballot question because I think it would be almost unconscionable to pass HB 447, Delegate Crosby's bill, and take voter rights away from the voters of St. Mary's County. For the last 2 years, all I've been hearing is election interference and threat to democracies. Well, we actually have a bill that would take voting rights away from our citizens without allowing them to weigh in first. So what we've done is take this language for a ballot question. It's almost copied verbatim from a ballot question that was asked of the voters in Queens Anne's County in 2016. And the way I see this working is that the voters want to change their elections. This would be asked in 2024 election. The voters want to change their elections in St. Mary's County. We'd have to come back in 2025 and follow that up with some legislation. Much like the marijuana referendum that was on the ballot this past year, it's going to be followed up with legislation. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm sure there's probably going to be a few.
Madam Vice Chair.
Hi, Delegate. Good to
Hey,
see
good.
you. Yes, you are correct. You and I spent a lot of time on the floor a couple years ago.
But I
around
feel we
HB.
became such good friends.
We really did. We bonded. We bonded. I do have a couple of questions
Sure, I'd be
about
happy
this
to answer
bill. Can you tell us more about what a straw election looks like?
So when we were drafting this legislation, we have always thought it would be a good idea to have the voters weigh in on this. And remember 2 years, we tried that as a floor amendment. And I tried to work that out with the bill sponsor before. And I just think that when you're taking votes away from your citizens, it would be helpful that they voice their opinion beforehand. And on this, we kind of deferred back to DLS and what we should do. And they were like, well, you need to ask a straw question. So, I'm not thrilled with the title of this bill. I thought it would come up more of a voter referendum. But I guess referendums are reserved for the entire state. This is how it would be done. And once the public weighed in on it, look, the elected officials would have to change it at that point. And the good news is we have time to do that, right? This is 2023. This would be on the 24 ballot, and we'd have plenty of time before this would ever come up into impact anyone in our county in 2026.
So is this something where we're using, because just the term straw, as you mentioned, I think this is sort of unique. Are you envisioning that we're using voting equipment, people are going to the polls, we're
Yeah.
doing early voting? So this is something that would it be on the ballot with the presidential and other candidates?
Yes.
Or it's a separate kind of?
No, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It would be on the ballot, just like the voter referendums that we've seen with marijuana last year. It would only be in St. Mary's County, and it would have a ballot question. And right here in the bill summary, in the fiscal note, it has the question label. Do you favor changing the method of selecting 4 of the 5 members, the St. Mary's County Board of County Commissioners, from the current method of being elected at large by the voters of St. Mary's County, with 1 member residing in each of the 4 election districts, to a new method where each of the 4 members are elected by only the voters of the district in which they are a member of? And it goes on the page. It resides, and the 5th member is elected at large and may reside in any district. So, as I've said, this language was copied directly from Queen Anne County that ran the similar situation back in 2016.
Just one more question. Thank you for helping me to envision what this would look like. If you can talk about any specific outreach to communities, to especially diverse communities, in terms of getting information that this straw ballot is taking place, and also, do you see any correlation between the fact that the previous bill that we passed in the House was looking at representation specifically for communities that are underrepresented, and this bill that the majority It basically kind of does the same thing that we were trying to avoid. So if you can comment on that, because I think we kind of know what
Sure,
what the outcome is
I
gonna
can
be.
give a comment on that. So first of all, I object the notion on Delegate Crosby's bill that when you look at St. Mary's County, we're not a county split up in 4 districts. We are a county, a community. So if you live in Leonardtown, there's a good chance you drive to Mechanicsville or over to Lexington Park, if not weekly, sometimes on a daily basis. So this district that we have arbitrary lines that cross every 4 years and we should be locked into them, I think it's a bunch of nonsense. And I think overwhelmingly, the people of St. Mary's would probably reject that bill. And if I think they're happy with the way the current election process is. I know there's been a racial component pointed out to this as far as minority voting. I saw that in the bill hearing. And look, I think what's going on is, this isn't about race, it's about politics. And you got about 10 or 15 members of the local Democratic Central Committee and their club really geared up and think this is how they're going to win a seat. They've been unsuccessful in past elections, so they want to change the rules. And I tell you, from a personal note, and we got into this a couple years ago on the bill, throwing a racial component into this, it's really harmful because St. Mary's County has a great track record of electing minority candidates. Joe Lee Somerville was the first black sheriff that was elected in the state of Maryland. We elected him in like the late 1970s. We had John Lancaster, who was a county commissioner. We elected him to 2 terms in the late 80s and early 90s. We have an African-American school board member who was elected under the same rules that we did right now, not broken out in district, at large. All these guys were elected by the same rules. I mean, she's been elected for 6 terms now and still continues to serve. And then you look at other races like St. Mary's County, we overwhelmingly backed Michael Steele. We overwhelmingly backed Charles Lawler against Steny Hoyer. So it's not about race, but it is about political ideology. And I just look at those other bills are just trying to game the system. And I think that's horrible to try to game the system and take away voters' rights. We're talking about threat to democracy all the time. Well, here it is. Here's a bill presented for the second time, HB 447, that takes away voters' ability to vote. And to do that without asking their opinion, I think is horrible. And that's the reason why I'd like to pass this bill and take it directly to the voters and get their perspective on that. Thank you.
Any other, Delegate Ebersol?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being so lucid on this bill. You referred to another bill, and I want to know if you think it would be fair to say that other bill was brought because they wanted to make sure that people that were not in the majority in your county, people who were in the minority either racially or in other ways, would be able to have a better voice within their districts. I'm not saying that you agree with that, but was that the reason that bill was brought?
I think the reason why the other bill was brought was political.
Okay, well, that's not what I asked, though.
But you asked me what I thought, and I'm answering
Yeah, but I
the
want
question.
kind of a yes, like, do you think that's what they were shooting for when they brought that bill? We can characterize it, but I want to know if you think that's what they were going for. Because I think the answer is yes to that.
Well, that might be the answer that they're going for. I don't know what's on their mind. I'll leave that up to the other bill sponsor to answer that. But in my opinion, it's completely political. And I'll tell you, and there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence of minorities trying to win a certain district because the district that they keep pointing out to, Delegate, hasn't even fielded a candidate 2 of the last 3 elections.
So you've been clear about that,
Yeah.
and that you're going beyond my question. My question would be: this question would not be put to individual districts; it would be put to the delegation, to the county at large, right?
Right.
So the same sort of voting procedure that concerns the other sponsor would exist in this bill.
Well, like I said, I personally believe that other bills are driven by political motivations.
Thank you.
Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I always have a hard time with this to an extent, this bill and this whole issue, St. Mary's County, the district voting. Your county's, what, about 105, 110,000
I think
people?
112.
112, you're moving on up, that's great. Is it my understanding, so we live close to Washington County, I know Doug Grossman represents Washington County, they're well bigger than you. They're about 160,000 people roughly, they're larger. and they elect their county commissioners. They have 5 of them, and they don't have districts at all. They elect 5 of them countywide. And that seems to be perfectly constitutional and permissible for that county. My county's a little bit smaller than you, we're around 70-some thousand people, and we select ours. We have 3 county commissioners. We select them countywide. Do the people, to your understanding of St. Mary's County, have the ability to choose that as an option and say, hey, if this is causing contention, we could just get rid of all districts. We're not Prince George's County. We're not Montgomery County. We don't have 1 million people. We only have 100,000 people. It's pretty easy to do a countywide election. Could you do it that way? Because other places seem to be able to do it.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely, we could do it that way. The ironic thing, Delegate, is more counties, I believe, do at-large voting than break it out per geographical district, like St. Mary's, Charles,
Right.
Calvert, Queen Anne's, and I believe Garrett is the other one. But yeah, absolutely, that would be an option. But I think
if
at this
that was the case, there wouldn't be any component of like, well, we could only elect what we have maybe a significant minority population in one district, but not in the whole county. If you went countywide, that would eliminate that issue. So it seems to me sometimes it's a tempest in a teapot of like, we want to fight about this, but St. Mary's County has the ability to say, hey, we'd like to do it by district, and this is what you're trying to get at. Is that what the people really want? But if you don't want to do it by district, we could just do it countywide, and then this is no longer an issue.
Well, I still think that the countywide vote, I mean, that would be changing from what we've done.
Right.
And look, St. Mary's County has had their county broke out in districts for the last 182 years. Right. I don't think there was ever a problem until a couple years ago when people from this local Democratic club thought it might be easier to win a county commissioner seat if we were in single-member districts. That's it. Originally, why the county was set up in districts, because it's a long, skinny county on a peninsula. We have 440 miles of coastline. And it was originally broke out in districts, so you'd have some type of geographical diversity that have entire county represented. That's the reason why. Because if you went at large, you could theoretically have all 5 county commissioners living in the same street. And I think that was the original intent and reason why they were broke out. But to answer your question, yes. Now, as far as this bill goes, I think it's a question of either we're going to keep what we have or we're going to switch over to a single member district. And I think that's
I guess,
the
what I
intent.
was getting at. We've spent a lot of time, and it's very concerning to people from this one county, and we want to affect all these other counties who apparently don't really want to be brought into the bill. But at the end of the day, it seems to me you have the constitutional ability. If the legislature of Maryland makes you change your district voting, it sounds to me like you're going to go back and change to all countywide at-large voting, same way my county does it, same way Washington County does it, and there's not going to be a blessed thing that anybody can do about that. It's completely legal. So it seems like we're kind of, we're dancing on the head of a pin. It's not going to have an impact, I guess.
I agree, and that could remain an option, but we kind of like to,
Try to
the
do
reason
your-
for the poll is to kind of squash that and, get some guidance from the voters.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the
Thank you.
testimony on House Bill 597, House Bill 742. Delegate Boyce.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I am Delegate Regina T. Boyce, here to testify on HB 742, Election Law, Party and Public Offices Prohibition. You were kind enough to review this bill in 2020 and 2021, and you passed it out of subcommittee and committee. I thank you. I'm just going to get to the point. This is the 4th year that I've filed this bill. If it never gets out of this committee, I'm okay with that. But the point I'm going to keep pushing is that central committees have their place and elected officials have their place. And so long as we continue in some spaces to commingle them, I think we can't really have a pure central committee system. And so this bill essentially prohibits an elected official, somebody like myself, somebody who's a mayor, somebody who is a county council, from also essentially running and deciding that they want to be a central committee member as well. You need to be one or the other. So essentially, historically, these central committees were created to help organize a party. Organize a party, organize a vote, organize to the testimony earlier, right? If you want your Republicans out, you organize your Republicans. You want your Democrats out, you organize your Democrats or your Green Party or your Libertarians or whoever to get out the vote. Having fundraisers, knocking on doors, raising money. But most importantly, of course, the one major function is also being a body of individuals who can vet a nominee from the committee to the governor should there be a resignation or expulsion or death of a delegate or a senator. And so I think the practice that some folks hold of holding these dual offices are questionable. And I think it's not only questionable because it certainly poses an interesting dynamic and an imbalance, and I think a conflict of interest, again, in that if I am the elected official who is also going to be supported by the body and supported by the party, why am I also on a committee where I can, to an extent, have undue influence over a group of people that are going to be supporting me anyway? I'm no help if I'm always away. I'm not a part of a quorum. I can't help you knock doors, but it's your job to do that for me. And so with that, I just believe that, that this bill just creates the needed dialogue around the questionable practice that is, again, my opinion, does not accurately serve the true democratic role of the party organization. And so I thank you for your time and your consideration. And I hope you again consider HB 742. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Boyce. Are there any questions? Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Delegate Boyce, for bringing this back. Because I thought we had passed it in some form.
So I'm going to say the dirty word. That's the dirty word of all committees, the Senate. And so it did pass this committee and the House twice. It did not move in the Senate. So I'll leave it at that.
The other thing is, do you know if central committees have the option of incorporating those restrictions in their bylaws?
Yes, ma'am, they do.
Because in my county, it is a practice. And I thought they alluded to the bill that we passed. But central committees are able to do this.
That is correct. And so I, in the last 3-4 years, have definitely talked to the party chair, and it was stated to me that while they have overarching rules per the Maryland election law, that each central committee is given the ability to govern as it seems fit. So, for instance, like in Baltimore City, the 43A Central Committee can decide that it's going to vet and choose a replacement. And then those recommendations go straight to the governor. And other central committees, it goes up to the entire county and jurisdiction, and they make the decisions. And so, yes, to your question is yes, they can. I had hoped that I could appeal to the actual state party to actually make the change there.
Thank you for your advocacy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Delegate Boyce? Seeing none, thank you, Delegate Boyce.
Thank you so much. Have
And
a good day, guys.
that concludes the testimony on House Bill 742. Delegate Hartman, House Bill 599.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the finest committee in the House, Ways and Means. For the record, I'm Delegate Wayne Hartman presenting House Bill 599. It's a property tax credit bill regarding public safety officers. So this bill, unlike the last bill we heard, is already passed in the Senate, and it is a very simple bill. I hate to say that, but it is. It allows total local control. I know you're shaking your head like, don't say that. It truly allows total local control. So what it does, allows the county government to create their own definition of a public safety officer. So it it gives the ability for a county for retention and recruitment. They can make their own definition for a public safety officer as to who they need to incentivize for whatever reason. It repeals the existing $2,500 cap and allows the county to determine the level of credit that they want to offer based on what public safety officers they may need. So there's no state impact, there's no county impact unless that county takes action, and the level of county impact would be to whatever degree that they individually decide on. So I don't think it takes much more explanation. This bill is supported very well in this room, both sides of the aisle, and with that, I'll ask if there are any questions. I ask for a favorable report.
Thank you. Any questions for Delegate Hartman? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 599.
Thank you.
Delegate Fair, House Bill 594, and you have a Kate Hamilton and Stuart Harvey here. Is Kate Hamilton here?
I do not see her.
Okay,
We will try to, my office will try to text Kate while we're presenting.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and colleagues of the greatest committee, Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Chris Fair, and I represent District 3 in the Maryland General Assembly. I'm here today requesting a favorable report on HB 594. This bill aligns Maryland with the federal government's 2022 Electoral Count Reform Act. The federal legislation passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. In the new law, it states, quote, "Not later than the date that is 6 days before the time fixed for the meeting of the electors, the executive of each state shall issue a certificate of ascertainment of appointment of electors under and in pursuance of the laws of such state providing for such appointment and ascertainment enacted prior to the election day." Like most federal bills, it's written with way too many words and sounds way more complicated than it is. But essentially, what we're talking about is certifying the election for president and sending on the list of electors to Congress to elect the president of the United States during the standard process that they follow. Maryland law does not specify currently the government office responsible for certifying and transmitting the certificate of ascertainment of electors. The legislation will simply rectify this gap and allow for a clean and clear line of transition from the election of the President of the United States and the reporting of electors to Congress. I'm honored to have my esteemed panel of one now experts here to testify on this support. I want to take a moment of personal privilege, though, to celebrate one panelist, the only one here. Stuart Harvey retired as Frederick County Election Director in 2021. I want to personally and publicly thank Stuart for his 12 years of service to the Montgomery County Board of Elections and his nearly 20 years of service as the Frederick County Board of Elections Director. Our state has greatly benefited. Our state has greatly benefited from your 30-plus years of public service. With that, Madam Chair, I urge our committee to issue a favorable report and turn it over to my panel.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee. It's nice to be back. One of my other hats that I wore many years ago was the Maryland Association of Election Officials co-chair of the Legislative Committee. I know you are very familiar with my former colleague, Katie Berry, who testifies on a regular basis down here. And I recognize some of you here, certainly Madam Vice Chair from years back. I just want to second, obviously, I should say that I am very proud to be a constituent of Delegate Fair in Frederick County, and I just want to second the support. This basically just aligns with what is already in Maryland election law in terms of transmission of results. For example, our local boards, as defined in election law, have to take their local results once we've certified them and send a copy to the governor, a copy to our local clerk of the court, and a copy to the State Board of Elections. There's a very clear process here. All this bill does is say, in effect, we need to follow federal law in terms of the ascertainment and where the results go, basically through the governor's office to transmit them to Congress.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the committee. My name is Kate Hamilton, and I'm a legal fellow at Campaign Legal Center. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that promotes and strengthens democracy across all levels of government, and we were part of the bipartisan effort to pass the Electoral Count Reform Act, the ECRA, last Congress. I'm testifying today in support of HB 594, which would bring Maryland's presidential election process into alignment with the ECRA. The ECRA updated the Electoral Count Act, the ECA, which has set a timeline for states to select presidential electors and transmit their votes to Congress for more than a century. Until the ECRA became law, the original text of the ECA had not been updated since its enactment more than 130 years ago. The outdated statute was thus full of imprecise language, gaps, and ambiguities. And with many words, the ECRA addressed the most concerning weaknesses and gained widespread support from across the aisle. Not every day that Senators Schumer and McConnell support the same piece of legislation, but each was a co-sponsor of the ECRA. This bill before us ensures that Maryland law complies with the ECRA by clarifying that the governor is responsible for issuing and transmitting a certificate of ascertainment of the state's appointment of electors, consistent with the returns of the election. HB 594 eliminates any ambiguity about the state's compliance with the ECRA by defining the governor's duties exactly as they appear in the updated federal law and ensuring that Maryland's slate of electors reflects the will of its voters. The bipartisan ECRA provides a clearer framework for casting and counting electoral college votes. We urge you to support this bill to implement the ECRA in Maryland. Thank you for your time, and I welcome the committee's questions.
Thank you. And now you are a panel of three. Any questions for the delegate or his panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. And that concludes the testimony on House Bill 594. Calling House Bill 618. Delegate Pruski. And my good friend, Mike Rund, who took me through the training, the firefighter training when I was first elected, and that was no joke. That was, oh, I was like, that's real fire? I was serious. It was legit. Good to see you, whenever you're ready. And is this your first time in Ways and Means?
Yes, it is, Madam Chair.
Okay, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Madam Chairwoman Atterbury, Madam Vice Chair Wilkins, and the committee, I want to thank you all for allowing me to testify today. It's a little bit difficult to go because we had a presentation about the same bill, just a little change from Delegate Hartman, but I want to be clear to give you a little bit of background about why I'm doing this bill and the rationale. The General Assembly in 2017 passed a bill for public safety providing a property tax credit. After serving 8 years on the Anne Arundel County Council, I saw firsthand how first responders and public safety were having issues living in the county where they worked. And certainly right now, that trend is continuing. And after discussions with many people, one of the big pieces about retaining recruitment is retirees. The fact that they work, they live, but where do they retire? And I know we're trying to keep that in Anne Arundel County, and many of the public safety personnel continue to serve, or in the volunteer capacity or other items. Obviously, there's information here in the fiscal note and the impact, but I do want to reiterate, and Delegate Hartman said this is enabling legislation. This does not require any of the counties to go ahead and make a decision. It's totally up to them. They decide on eligibility. Also, in the legislation I'm bringing for you, the $2,500 max is still listed. But I do appreciate you allowing me to present this today, and I ask for your consideration for a favorable report, and certainly you'll hear some testimony from someone who's no stranger to the General Assembly, but also to give the rationale on why we should support this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Ways and Means. I'm Mike Rund. I'm President Emeritus of the Professional Firefighters of Maryland. And I retired after 32 years in Howard County back in 2019. This bill, like the delegate said, is just enabling. It allows the counties that are offering this tax credit to the firefighters to continue it to a firefighter who still lived and worked in that community as a retiree. This legislation will hopefully keep those members who serve that community in that community as an extra incentive. Like I said, it's not mandated, it's just enabling. And on behalf of the over 10,000 active and retired professional firefighters in Maryland, we would ask for a favorable report.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 618. Calling House Bill, well, Delegate Chisholm is not here. He has House Bill 766. Okay, we are going to go with House Bill 563, Delegate Plakovich Carr. And she has 3 virtual witnesses, Ramya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. For the record, I'm Delegate Julie Polakovich-Carr, here to present House Bill 563. This is legislation that I'm working on this session with our own Delegate Griffith. So this bill would make some reforms to the appointment process that is used by our central committees when filling vacancies in the General Assembly. And as we know, when there is a vacancy in either the House or the Senate, our central committee, the local party, has the duty under our state's constitution to recommend a name to the governor who ultimately makes that appointment. So under current law, we have all appointments. We did hear legislation last week that would have special elections if a vacancy happened in the first year of the term. But I'll say whether you love that bill or hate that bill, and under current law, we still are in a situation where we have an appointment process by the central committees. So our thought with this legislation is to make some common sense reforms, really to lift the floor and set some minimum standards in terms of the processes that are followed by central committees and by our state parties in filling these vacancies. This legislation is not about any one specific appointment, but really rather because Maryland does have a very large number of vacancies that happen. In the last 10 years, we've had more than 60 legislative appointments. Overall, we rank second in the nation for having the most appointments that happen. And that's pretty notable because there are a number of legislatures that are actually larger than ours, so it happens pretty frequently here. So the bill does a number of things. First of all, it would ensure that there is sufficient time for members of the public to be aware of the application time and to actually apply, so it's not just limited to party insiders. It would ensure language access. Under the Federal Voting Rights Act, there are requirements put on, at this point, just 2 counties in our state, Montgomery and Prince George's County, because of the large number of Spanish speakers in those jurisdictions. We would be mirroring that requirement and have translation of materials about the appointment. We'll be giving opportunity for residents and voters of that district and jurisdiction to see the applications that have been submitted and to actually watch the vetting process of candidates, whether the Central Committee does interviews or has some kind of candidates forum, but making sure the public is aware of that and can watch in. We would ensure that there is transparency in the voting, that there's not secret ballots. And lastly, require that if a member of the Central Committee is going to apply for a vacancy while they still sit on the Central Committee, that they would need to recuse themselves from voting. And this really is to deal with the public perception of self-dealing. So notably, a number of these provisions have already been adopted by individual Central Committees from both parties, as well as in some cases by one of the state parties. And we have, Delegate Griffith and I have done outreach to state parties, for both of our state parties, as well as to a number of individual central committees to get feedback on the bill. But overall, we feel like these are reasonable reforms that really will boost public trust in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have some folks here virtually, Seth Grimes, Jason Garber, and Liza Smith. So Seth Grimes, whenever you're ready for 2 minutes, please.
Although speaking only for myself, I support HB 563 as a step to promote transparency, accountability, and fairness in the legislative vacancy appointment process. The bill ensures an adequate minimum application period for candidates to step forward to apply for a vacancy appointment. It requires the Senate committee to take sensible steps to advertise vacancies and by requiring translation languages other than English based on local standards promotes applications from currently underrepresented populations. The requirement that
Okay, let's see if he comes back in. But in the meantime, we can let in one of the other individuals, Jason Garber or Liza Smith. Mr. Grimes, if you can hear me, we cannot hear or see you. You went in and out and you were frozen. You may have to leave and come back in. We'll try to hear from two other people that are here virtually, and we will circle back to you. But you probably can't hear me right now. Good afternoon, Ms. Smith. Whenever you're ready, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to testify on the behalf of Montgomery County Women's Democrat Club. My name is Lisa Smith. I am also an elected member of the Montgomery County Democrat Central Committee. I represent D14. WDC urges the passage of HB 0563. This bill is essential for ensuring our democracy remains strong. It established requirements that ensure that those who fill midterm vacancy for senator or delegate in the assembly are selected fairly. I consider this a do the right thing bill. No harm is done to anyone in this bill. I'm still allowed to participate in an assortment of shady shenanigans. I still have the home court advantage by being a member with my name up from consideration. This bill only asks me to take my finger off the scale and to allow someone outside of the system to be considered for an appointment. By creating a transparent and unbiased process, HB 0563 ensures that no individual or group can capitalize on the outcome of the selection process. As a result, HB 0563 is a critical bill that will increase public engagement in the Central Committee processing, and greater engagement will lead to less biased processing. All Marylanders should support this bill to keep our democracy strong and to ensure that our Central Committee hear from the people who will be represented by the person chosen. Thank you for your consideration and commitment to democracy. I look forward to a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Smith? Okay, Delegate Hornberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill. Having previously served on a central committee, this is one of the biggest roles that they play when they get elected, if the opportunity does arise itself. In previous years, I've worked with colleague Delegate Moon to address this issue as well, and I was just trying to look up the fiscal note here, but one of the suggestions that he thought was good was to always try to get that back into the hands of the voter as soon as possible. And in the case where there was adequate notice and time, move that to the presidential election to fill a special vacancy. So did your bill talk to that, or is it just for the full year, 4-year term?
Sorry, there we go. Personally, I am supportive of special elections, but I'll just note that under the legislation we heard last week from Delegate Foley, which is, the successor to the Delegate Moon bill, that even under that bill, there still are appointments. So I think that making reforms to the appointment process makes sense, because whether we pass that bill or don't, we will still have appointments.
So just to clarify, you're not opposed to a special election as long as it falls on the presidential? I mean, we all know that special elections standalone have very low turnout. No one, I don't think, is advocating for that. But would you be opposed to it moving to the presidential if there was adequate time for notice?
I'm not opposed. I think I co-sponsored the bill.
Right, great, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to let Mr. Garber go ahead and testify. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Garber.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members. My name is Jason Garber. Just by way of background, I am presently the chair of the Baltimore County Democratic State Central Committee. I am here in my individual capacity I have served as the nominations chair, the parliamentarian, and first vice chair prior to me becoming the chair. I only bring that up as background for experience purposes for today's testimony. Much of the public notice and other measures that have been discussed in terms of transparency have already been incorporated in our bylaws. The one thing that has not is the recusal issue, and I do believe that that is a very effective way to eliminate the issue of self-dealing. The issue here is one of control. So I've been asked in the past, why are you in favor of recusal? Why shouldn't someone be able to vote for themselves? Well, it's the issue of control where you have, for example, if, like a board of elections, you wouldn't have the board of elections in charge of their, a race in which one of the members is involved. That member would have to recuse himself and resign. Here, we're just asking for recusal, which is a very reasonable way to approach this, and it strikes a balance between finding interested Central Committee members versus those that may be there for other reasons too. So I do believe that recusal is the right course to take here, and I thank everyone for their efforts in putting this bill together. If there's any other questions, there's no other need for me to take up more time than we already have.
Thank you. Delegate Wilkins has a question. Vice Chair Wilkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for this bill. I think that this bill is certainly moving us in the right direction, and I appreciate the bipartisan work on this. I just had a couple of questions. Are you able to share any of the feedback generally that you received from the parties around this bill? I'm just curious.
Yes, so Delegate Griffith and I did alert the state parties to the legislation, and I think he could probably offline can fill you in more in terms of how his conversations went. We also reached out to a number of individual central committees, and I think it is important to note that the folks who are testifying today are here in personal capacities. For a lot of central committees, they have not had to take up any issues of appointment in recent years. It really is a fairly small number in terms of either party that have weighed in recent years. So I think a lot of times they're looking at it through the lens of the appointments that they've gone through and kind of where their individual members are at. But I think on the whole, what we've settled in the legislation, people are willing to live with.
Okay, thank you for that. Also, in terms of this bill, one of the things that I know we often do in Montgomery County is forums so that constituents and residents can hear from the candidates and get a sense of where they are in the issues and judge, their competency for the role. Does the bill require, I was looking through it, does it require any forums or any of those kinds of public vetting opportunities other than the application being posted online?
It does, yes. It says that the Central Committee shall hold a public meeting to interview the individuals who applied to fill the vacancy. And I, envision there that either could be one-on-one interviews that are public or a candidates forum. And if you think that language needs some massaging, let us know. We're happy to work with you on that.
Thank you. And just my final question, and I know one of the witnesses started to address it, but I wanted to get your thoughts and perspective on it. Regarding a Central Committee member who's applied not being able to vote for themselves, actually two different questions on this. One is, does your bill consider, I believe that in certain Central Committees, only that district votes. So if there are 3 people from District 5 who represent that district on the Central Committee, only those 3 people vote for the Central Committee. So one, does your bill look at that? Because that's something that is really stark and can really make a difference in terms of an election, especially if someone from that district is running. Does that, is that contemplated at all in your bill?
The bill is silent on that particular point, but I think your point is exactly right, because if you're talking about an even smaller number of a small group of people voting, you being, the Central Committee member being one of those votes has a much bigger sway than if they're one of 20 or 30 votes.
And is there any reason why you didn't want to address that? Because that can really make a big difference.
In my conversations, at least with some of the Democratic Central Committees, the committees that use those seem to feel fairly protective of that decision to vote by district, and honestly, that's why I decided not to weigh into it. I think there aren't that many Central Committees that do use that structure, but again, I'd be happy to dig into that more with you.
Okay, final question is just around the recusal in terms of someone who has applied. definitely see the different sides of it, not opposed to it. But I do know that every time I get in the booth, it's a private secret ballot, but I'm voting for myself if my name is on there. So I wanted to get a sense from you, if you can share more about your thinking. It seems super specific and prescriptive as opposed to the rest of the bill, and just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. I mean, I think this is one of those pieces where when members of the public have concerns about the appointment process, oftentimes I hear from people specifically on this point that these are, party insiders by nature of their position who may already have access to inside information about when a vacancy is coming. They've already cultivated relationships with other members of the Central Committee, and there's nothing nefarious in that. That just is the nature of the role that they have. So they already have some built-in advantages, as we heard from one of the witnesses today. So on top of that, to be one of a very small number of votes, as opposed to the thousands or tens of thousands of votes that we all received in recent election, I think really just adds more weight to those advantages that they already have. I'll also say that this is a piece of legislation that we did seek advice from the Attorney General's office on, and they did point out to us that there are other ways where we as a legislature have in the past, restricted the role of Central Committee members. For instance, a member of the Central Committee under statute is not allowed to serve as an elections judge or to serve on a board of elections. So there's been some other places in the past where the legislature has weighed in and, say, narrowed the scope of what a Central Committee member can and can't do.
Okay, Mr. Grimes, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to testify again because we couldn't hear anything you said. You were going in and out, and you froze, and then you disappeared. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to go again.
Thank you.
This is the first time I'm trying to testify from my office.
Okay.
So, I'm Seth Grimes, I'm a
President of Montgomery County and a member of the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, testifying only on behalf of myself. I will abbreviate my testimony given the circumstances to say that I favor HB 563. It promotes transparency, accountability, and fairness in the vacancy nomination process and beneficially creates uniformity across the state. I will address just one point that has come up the last few minutes, which is recusal. Unlike a general election where a candidate may vote for themselves, in this case, there will be candidates for appointment who cannot vote for themselves because they are not Central Committee members. So therefore, it is unfair that a candidate may vote for themselves when others can't. I do want to make an additional point that I have proposed that the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, of which I'm a member, adopt a position in support of special elections as the most democratic method to fill Maryland General Assembly vacancies that occur during the four-year legislative term. I urge you all to back special elections to fill legislative vacancies to move Maryland away from the insider politics that HB 563 seeks to fix. Vacancies should be filled by direct popular voting in keeping with our shared democratic small d ideals. In a situation, for instance, that Delegate Wilkins brought up where maybe only the members of the Central Committee who reside in the district with an opening, that would further restrict the vote and just make the system even more undemocratic. So the answer is to institute special elections, and until we do that, to ameliorate the conditions of favoritism, of unfairness, of lack of transparency and accountability and uniformity across the state by adopting HB 563. Thanks for the opportunity to give it another shot.
Thank you. We appreciate you hopping back on. Any questions for any of the panelists? Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much. And that concludes the testimony on House Bill 563. We're going to hop back into our order. Delegate Chisholm, House Bill 766, and Kim Mills is listed. I don't know if you want her to come on up.
I don't think, oh, there we go. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of Ways and Means. I apologize for being late, but this speaker was testifying on her own bill in my committee, so my exit was delicate. For the record, I'm Delegate Brian Chisholm here to present House Bill 766, which seeks to eliminate the state transfer tax on purchase of primary residence priced $350,000 and below. The bill will save Maryland home buyers up to $1,750 on closing costs. Why should we do this? Will it lower values? Absolutely not. However, it will help Marylanders to qualify to purchase homes by reducing their closing costs. Maryland ranks in the top 5 highest closing cost states in the country. I'm a recovering mortgage banker of 20 years, and I understand how important the closing cost factor is in qualifying for a new home. This is especially true for those trying to enter the market for the very first time with very little savings and zero equity from their current home. The elimination of some of these closing costs can pay huge dividends for those trying to qualify for a home. We as policymakers should be promoting home ownership because it is the most effective way to build wealth, especially for low-income households. According to the 2019 survey of Consumer Finances, a triannual survey that collects detailed accounts of household finances, the median homeowner has 40 times the household wealth of a renter. The lower the income of the home-owning household, the greater the share of its wealth coming from that home ownership. This pattern has remained consistent over the last 3 decades, according to the historical survey. We should be encouraging home ownership at every level in an effort to empower more Marylanders to begin the journey of building greater wealth. I know it's been said that money can't buy happiness, and maybe that's true, but I think most people would like to find out for themselves. If all of us in this room were to seriously reflect on why we consider so many pieces of legislation every year as legislator, it's safe to say that we are trying to help our citizens solve problems with resources they may not be able to afford or obtain on their own. Hence why we're going to spend over $60 billion in fiscal 2024. Unfortunately, homeownership is on a decline, down to 69% from 72% in 2020. What we are trying to achieve with this piece of legislation is self-reliance, individual ascension up the economic ladder to financial independence and freedom, and the ability for more Marylanders to acquire their own problem-solving resources. Where do I see this having the most dramatic effect? Here in Anne Arundel County, probably not. Montgomery County, probably not. But on the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, and Baltimore City, fixing Baltimore's vacant housing crisis was in the Baltimore Sun a few days ago. According to what it stated, it is $7.5 billion in new government agency, private and public funds. The vacant housing crisis costs taxpayers more than $200 million annually in direct spending and lost tax revenue. They are magnets for crime, and Baltimore's vacant homes catch fire at twice the national average. Homeownership brings social benefits to a neighborhood, everything from neighbors who are more willing to intervene in community problems to residents who are more likely to join parent-teacher associations and neighborhood watch groups, which tends to lead to both lower violent and property crime rates. I've seen the fiscal note, and I understand that it's high. I am not asking the state of Maryland to spend a single dollar. I'm asking Maryland to let Marylanders keep $28 million of their own money in their pockets so they can start to pursue this American dream. I know Program Open Space is opposed to this legislation, and I understand that. They do a great job. But this bill would not touch any bit of development. It is almost impossible in the state of Maryland to develop a piece of land and build a new home for less than $350,000. In fact, the average is $500,000. This seeks to achieve the same goals as Program Open Space. Safer communities, cleaner communities, and in keeping communities together. Program Open Space is scheduled to get $400 million in this fiscal note. If you were to add it all up, I'm asking for 7% of that to be left to the Maryland taxpayer so that they can start to pursue the American dream and home ownership. And we do have a $1.2 billion fiscal surplus in 2024, which I'm sure the governor could probably find a place to replace some of this money. And with that, I ask for a favorable report, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Whenever you're ready, ma'am.
Thank you. Chairman Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and distinguished members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Kim Mills, and I'm a Maryland Realtor living in Anne Arundel County. I'm the 2017 past president of Anne Arundel County Association of Realtors, and I'm the immediate past president of the Women's Council of Realtors for Anne Arundel County Network. I'm here today to testify in favor of HB 766. House Bill 766 will exempt the state transfer tax for real estate sales under $350,000. In a study done by Forbes based on the 2020 fourth quarter numbers, Maryland is in the top 4th high-cost states to buy a home. Obviously, the transfer tax plays a role in this. In January of 2023, the median sales price for Anne Arundel County was $421,000. So this bill is going to help eliminate the transfer tax for under $350,000, helping the buyers with the smaller budgets. Very likely the first-time home buyer or possibly the ones downsizing. Marylanders are struggling to purchase homes, meaning they're getting caught in the rent trap and are fleeing the state. I'd like to mention not all states charge this transfer tax either. On a sales price of $350,000, the average savings will be $1,750. Typically, this is split between the buyers and the sellers. However, in recent years with the bidding wars that we've seen, the buyers have been paying all the transfer and recordation fees on transactions in order to be the winning bids. In addition to the bidding wars, many buyers were paying more than asking price, therefore increasing the tax paid to the state, oftentimes more than the appraised values of the homes. Eliminating this transfer tax would help buyers across the state to get into homes they owned. I'm sure you're well aware that real estate is the best way to build wealth. We want Marylanders to buy houses, build lives in a state that they can continue to contribute to the greatness that we have here. For these reasons, I urge you a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the committee have any questions for Delegate Chisholm or his panel? Mr. Buckle?
Thank you,
Delegate
Madam
Buckle.
Chair. I just have one question based on what you said and then one question looking in the file. Did you say, Delegate Chisholm, that the Project Open Space program currently receives about $400 million from the transfer tax allocations?
Program Open Space, based on the fiscal note that's in the file, if you add it up, it's just short of 400 million. I think it's 399 million.
399 million, so this only applies to sort of middle class or lower middle class or starter homes. It wouldn't take away a significant portion of that funding?
That's correct.
And then the other thing, I looked, this was amazing to me, I looked, Maryland Realtors submitted some testimonies that they did a survey in 2023. I'm always constantly amazed how we tax everything. I mean, we tax your ability to borrow money, your ability to file a mortgage. We tax like every little thing that you do from the time you get up till you go to bed at night. We find a way to tax it. And so, this survey says that transfer taxes are a significant part of the upfront cost of homeownership. In fact, in a 2023 survey, 57% of residents say saving for these costs is a huge obstacle to buying a home, with another 29% stating it is a median obstacle. I never even really thought about that, quite frankly. Do you guys experience that? I know, Delegate Chisholm, you've had some experience in the field, and Ms. Mills. Do you guys experience that where people come in and say, I might be able to qualify for this mortgage, I'm stretched to my limit, but I can't save the down payment, plus I need $2,000, $3,000, $7,000 up front that they won't put in the mortgage to cover these costs, and that's going to prevent me from going to closing?
That's correct. I think that what you'll find when you're qualifying for a mortgage, there's two factors you have to look at, and one is the monthly payment, and the other is what we call proof of funds, which the proof of funds is, do you have the money to bring to the table to close on this piece of real estate? And this puts first-time homebuyers at a huge disadvantage. Oftentimes now, because of the way the real estate market has been, if you own a home now and you go to buy a new home, hopefully you have enough equity to start to help you bring those funds to the table. But for the first-time home buyer, it can eliminate you from being able to close, because you do have to come up with so many of those closing costs. And once again, because of the real estate market we currently find ourselves in, sellers are much less likely to pay for a first-time home buyer's closing costs. And so it puts them at a tremendous disadvantage and not being able to come up with those savings, because it's tough to save money in today's economy, especially without that equity from your current home.
Thank you.
Any other questions for this panel? We do have two other folks that are coming up unfavorable. Okay, thank you very much,
Thank you, Madam
Delegate.
Chair.
And Sarah Nebel and Ann Jones, please come forward for 2 minutes each.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. My name is Ann Jones. I work with Partners for Open Space and also with numerous land trusts in Baltimore County and in Howard County. If there's anything that we learned during COVID, among other things, is that people want to be outdoors. And what happened during that is that the parks, the open spaces, the agricultural products, the questions with the supply chain, I think everybody went into a grocery store and found out that they didn't have enough of something that they wanted to get. That all came up doing, it brought to a head during COVID how important these spaces are. These are the very programs that are funded by the transfer tax that preserve these things for Maryland. The major programs are stateside program Open Space, which looks at state parks and recreational facilities. Local side, which is your local parks and playgrounds. The Maryland Ag Land Preservation Foundation, which buys land from farmers. The Rural Legacy, which protects areas rich in natural resources, and the heritage areas. The transfer tax was uniquely designed so that when it responds to the real estate market, when more homes are sold, the demand for parks and open space increases, and the transfer tax generates additional revenue. When there is less demand, there's less revenue. For this is a relatively modest amount when you look at the investment that it gives to the average homeowner to be able to enjoy local parks and playgrounds, preserve farms, forests, and heritage areas. We urge you to have a negative, unfavorable report on this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you for this time to speak. My name is Sarah Niebel. I'm the Executive Director of Scenic Rivers Land Trust. Our mission is to protect the natural and scenic areas in Anne Arundel County, and we oppose HB 766. This funding has real local impact to a lot of communities, and I'll give a couple examples. So for the last decade, Anne Arundel County has used this funding source to purchase over 500 acres of adjoining properties and add them to Bacon Ridge Natural Area, one of the largest forests in the county, and it now encompasses over 1,100 acres in Crownsville. Bacon Ridge has over 12 miles of trails for residents and visitors to enjoy. As another example, my organization is partnering with the state side of Program Open Space to protect a 132-acre property that houses the last operating sawmill in the county, and it is on my organization's top 10 list of the most important properties to conserve in the county. We're doing this because the landowners are interested in selling us a conservation easement and helping their business. The program Open Space can be used in urban areas as well. I'm excited that the Green Space Equity Bill, HB 503, might pass this year and provide even more program open space funding to local nonprofits to provide green space in underserved communities, helping those communities like Brooklyn Park heal and get relief from blistering hot summer days. This is not in the interest of communities to take away funding for public spaces, farms, and forests that we all benefit from. Please don't support this bill. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Delegate Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for coming out. And I'm a huge supporter, of land preservation. We have a lot of properties in my district that are supported with land pres. I guess my question is, we're always looking for balance, right? And we certainly want to, make sure that we're preserving as much of our lands, ag lands, things as we can, providing some of the services you provide. But we also want to make sure that we create home ownership. And some of these communities that are underserved, I think we want to try to allow those communities to own their communities, not just have to rent properties in those communities. We want to create home ownership through this. And under the fiscal note, this is only for properties under $350,000 and below. I think the average home in Maryland is $365 or $367. So this is only impacting the smaller end, and the fiscal note's only like 28 million overall. I guess my question is, how do you feel about balancing, trying to make sure some of these underserved communities through this program will have a better opportunity to own their communities, and there's still tons of revenue available for your programs?
I'm going to jump into that, if you don't mind, a little bit. First of all, there are estimates on the revenue and what the impact will be. I've seen different estimates based upon how you look at it. And there is already some benefit for first-time homeowners, that they are exempt from portions of the transfer tax. And I've been unable to get my finger on exactly how much. I've been told that by the people who sponsored the legislation many years ago. What I have seen about communities and the cost of housing in a lot of areas is driven a lot of times by the lack of availability of land and by the fact that people don't want a higher density. And you have people that are against that for very good reasons. I mean, we like to say NIMBY, but sometimes NIMBY is a good reason. And that's because there aren't adequate schools, there aren't adequate open space, there isn't adequate park, there aren't adequate facilities to meet the people that are coming in. And I would argue that the relatively small investment that this makes on the part of the first-time homeowner or the homeowner at all, to the extent that that can go and open some green space in their area, it increases the value. Studies have always shown that living close to parkland and open space increases the value of the home. It makes it more livable, and if we can do it right, it makes it more likely that we can get some better housing in urban areas.
I guess just my final follow-up to that is, again, balance, right? Everything you said is right and accurate, but don't we also want to, because encourage homeownership and do everything we can to push up homeownership, allow these communities to own their community, and obviously the revenue generated from the property taxes, which gets reinvested back to schools and their community and other open spaces as well. I mean, don't we want to try to find some balance in these two programs?
I think that's why you're probably looking at 1/2 of 1% of the purchase price.
Thank you.
Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it seems the objection isn't giving people a tax break. The objection is that the money goes to your program. So this is one of our taxes that has a particularized usage, as opposed to most of our taxes just go into the general fund, and there's always 100,000 different things we want to use it for. So I guess my question becomes, if you're talking about, I appreciate your concerns. Many times I look at the fiscal notes and think, I don't know what the number's going to be, but we have to live with them. It says potentially $28 million. It seems like it's about a $400 million a year program. If there is a methodology or mechanism out of the 60-odd billion dollars with a B that we're sloshing around in our state government, our budget now, if there's a methodology to backfill or replace some of this funding, do you have an objection to cutting taxes for these folks?
I would not say that I have an objection to cutting taxes. I do, however, think that having a designated revenue source has been very valuable to the programs that protect the open space and farms in this state.
Have we ever gone in before? For some reason, I recall during my years here, we go in sometimes during budgetary situations and we remove money.
Correct.
So you say it's a dedicated funding source, but I got news for you. If we need the money next year, we can take it from you as quick as that.
Captain Burfa has his own money.
Yeah, exactly. Never vote for the Burfa because no one knows what's in it. But we wind up like, oh, gee, we took all your money this year. But what I'm suggesting to you is I appreciate having a dedicated source, but I hope that there would be room for some recognition of we can meet both objectives. We can both improve our housing market, make it more affordable for people to stay here, to live here, to move here, particularly as first-time home buyers, and at the same time have green spaces, which I think everyone supports Project Open Space. It doesn't have to be an either-or conversation. So I hope that you guys would support that if there are ways to find methodologies to make sure that you're not overly harmed by a reduction in these tax. Thank you.
Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I have is, are you objective? You said something about, did you say something about new construction? Did I hear that mentioned?
Not from either of us, no.
Okay, so you're not objecting to like an existing house? If we would, you would be objective to that also, correct? Existing property?
Correct. The transfer tax applies to all, so yes.
All right, last question. Are you familiar with it? If you buy a HUD house from I know in Baltimore County, you don't actually pay no transfer tax.
There are a number of exemptions to the transfer tax, and that's what I was starting to say first time. I do not have as good a handle on that as I should.
Right, well, I believe if it's a VA house, if it's been foreclosed on, or a FHA house been foreclosed on, that you purchase it, you don't have to pay state or county property tax or transfer tax. So do you think it's fair that the federal government doesn't have to pay, but yet first-time home buyer has to pay?
I am not going to, to say that the federal government is sort of like against the first-time homeowner doesn't exactly seem like a balance that I would
Doesn't
put
seem
out
fair,
there.
does it?
Well, who buys the HUD house then ultimately?
A home buyer, of course.
Right.
But I'm saying they get a credit because they don't have to pay the transfer taxes, or in Baltimore County, it's half the transfer tax. Anyway, if it's a FHA foreclosure, you don't have to pay any transfer taxes or anything. Only because it's FHA or HUD home, you don't have to pay the tax. So the federal government's actually exempt from paying this transfer tax.
So you don't think they pass that on to the
No,
I'm gonna,
the home, the buyer would not, it'd be a savings to the buyer.
correct. So those houses then are already, those houses that one could argue were probably in a more blighted area are already exempt from the transfer tax.
Well, it's not blighted areas, it can be any HUD
Any
house.
HUD,
Yeah, and, you know,
You're right.
some of them are pretty nice houses. But I was just wondering what your thoughts were, you really give that much thought as far as their exemptions.
I did not.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Hornberger.
Yeah, a lot of discussion, thank you, Madam Chair, on the fund here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that fund has been rated in the past, right?
Correct.
By different governors, okay. And then as a follow-up to that, I know we're getting a little farther away from the bill here, but would you be opposed to sort of a lockbox for that fund?
Not at all. Okay. But I will say also, part of the 400, if I could just go there, does include a repayment of part of the funding. There are three numbers in that $400,000, which is one reason why this is so difficult. Or, right. Pardon me, 400 million, whatever. One of them is the actual transfer tax that comes in a given year, which is less than that. Then there was a repayment that was agreed to in 2016 that is part of the funds that were previously diverted. And then there's an overattainment and an underattainment. And this year there's a significant amount of overattainment going in because of what happened 3 years ago.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you for that background. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 766. Thank you. Calling House Bill 572, Delegate Kaiser. And there's two folks virtual and someone signed up for information that's here, but I don't know if you want to bring that person up or not.
Sure, if they're here.
David, I'm good. I don't want to mispronounce it. Garris. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Pleasure to be before you today. I'd like to thank you all and like to, I don't think she's here right now, but thank the Vice Chair, who is the only co-sponsor on this legislation, and I appreciate her support. This bill has to do with something called risk limiting audits. This is something that's passed out of the committee, I think, the last 3 years, and it hasn't had much success in the Senate. So the first thing I'll mention is that I hear that the Senate is interested in passing the bill this year, so I hope you all will take a look at it again as well. I do want to mention, I think one of the people that was supposed to testify today was Joanne Antoine from Common Cause, who had to be absent at the last minute, so please take a look at their testimony as well. So what are risk limiting audits and what is this all about? The first thing I would say is the bill is about election integrity, and really that nothing matters more to our democracy than free and fair elections, and also people's confidence that those elections are free and fair. So what is it about? You can take a look at my written testimony. I refer to them as RLAs, risk limiting audits, as being the gold standard. And they are the type of auditing procedures that are recommended by election experts as the best way to verify election results and to ensure that there wasn't hacking, an easier way to check the results afterwards to ensure that the proper winners were selected. At this point, I think we're just suggesting using risk-limited audits and then in the future, doing it pre-certification. I think the county boards of election have agreed that this is probably something they could do, though I think they'd probably like a practice year or a practice run before it's required pre-certification. But I think the worst thing could happen to any of us is that if a mistake were made for any reason, to find out that someone was certified, or in the case of county officials, even sworn in early December before maybe a mistake were found. I'd just like to end with what the National Academy of Sciences says. The design and, quote, the design and development of current computer systems, no matter how well constructed, cannot anticipate and prevent all possible means of attack. There is no realistic mechanism to fully secure vote casting and tabulation computer systems from cyber threats. So therefore, I'm adding here that manual auditing is necessary. I'm certainly glad to speak further to any members on the subcommittee who want more background. If you want to talk to the expert on this issue, I'm staring right at him right now, and then he can explain the details. But I'd be glad to answer any of those questions. But certainly, I think Mr. Garris from Anne Arundel, but I assume from the Maryland Association of Election Officials, can answer some of those technical questions as well. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is David Garris. I am the president of the Maryland Association of Election Officials, otherwise known as MAO, as well as the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections. I'm the director. I wanted to come today to provide information regarding RLAs. MAO does support creating an RLA program in Maryland. As the delegate just mentioned, we support creating a pilot program for 2024 involving a large, medium, and small county to get the particulars of the program, the master of the program, before we launch it statewide. Would like to say Maryland does have a robust audit program in place, including a 100% automated audit and post-election hand counts. However, adding this or creating this program in lieu of the comprehensive audits could help secure the security of the election program, as well as give everyone more confidence in the integrity of the results. So we always support that. With that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, folks, let's let the other two people. Catherine Berry is here virtually for information purposes, and Janet Milson is testifying favorably, so we'll let them in. Hi, Ms. Berry, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Catherine Berry. I'm here also representing the Maryland Association of Election Officials, and I'm also the election director in Carroll County. So we have worked with this committee for several years on the RLA with Delegate Kaiser. And as David, I will echo what David said. I think we need to kind of review all of the robust audits that we already have in place, such as the comprehensive audit, our automated audit, and then the post-election manual audit. So we just kind of need to look at what we might be able to take away and then replace it with the RLA, if that is what the committee wishes to have moving forward. Right now, with the mail-in ballot canvass happening after the election, which would in theory be concurrent to when we are running the RLA, we're just trying to make sure that we're cognizant of the scheduling and the time that we have, and then also keep in mind, that our elected officials need to be sworn in by early December. But if we can work out a way to eliminate some maybe the other audit requirements and then replace it with RLA, I think, as the delegate mentioned, the pilot program for small, medium, and large counties would be best suited moving forward. So we are hopeful that we can work with the committee on this bill, and I'm here just to answer any other questions you may have along with Mr. Goodrich. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, Janet Millison.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, Delegate Kaiser, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Janet Millison, and I represent the League of Women Voters of Maryland. I'm here to reiterate the League's support for risk limiting audits as proposed in House Bill 572. We testified in favor of the same proposal last year. limiting audits can help accomplish this. Think of these audits as being like certain quality assurance measures in manufacturing, rather than examining every unit that rolls off the line. A statistically determined number of random samples are checked. If these randomly chosen samples are good, you can be pretty confident the whole batch is okay. Risk limiting audits only sample as many voter verified paper ballots as are necessary depending on the margin of victory in a particular contest, making them more efficient than the current requirement to audit a fixed percentage of ballots. Guidelines set in advance can expand the audit to a full recount if findings warrant it, and at least one statewide contest must be audited this way, plus at least one local contest in each county. Another advantage of that House Bill 572 is that it would propose risk-limiting audits be completed before the election is certified, rather than up to 120 days after the election. The process would be transparent, and a full report would be posted on the State Board of Elections website. Both voters and candidates will be reassured by this rapid confirmation that election results were correctly determined. For all these reasons, the League of Women Voters of Maryland urges a favorable report on House Bill 572. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions for Delegate Kaiser or the witness, any of the witnesses? Delegate Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Kaiser, for bringing the bill forward. Quick question. Obviously, risk limiting audits is considered a best practice. But reading the fiscal note and trying to dig in a little bit about what audits is this removing as part of this? I think that's the big crux of this, is what will be eliminated as part of this.
Thank you, Delegate. That's an excellent question. And I think I'm going to have to get back to you with the answer on that. I think it's possible that what we do now, or that type of audit that we do that relies on the current automated software audit and that really can't help highlight a wrong election and isn't done for 120 days, is probably the one that we would eliminate. I think this would serve the greater purpose of ensuring our elections, and it isn't then that costly, given how small a number that could be looked at in most races.
Would you be potentially agreeable to something where we implement the risk limited audits without eliminating any other audits to see how it goes, and then use that as a kind of an opportunity to see what may be redundant at that point?
I think that would be a great consideration for you to make. Yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 572. House Bill 752. Delegate Vogel, and there is she's probably not here, Joanne Antoine and Kevin Canale.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, colleagues on my committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Joe Vogel testifying in support of HB 752, requesting a favorable report. This is a bill on election transparency and accountability in the procurement process. The bill would require the State Board of Elections to vote to approve or reject a procurement contract valued at over $200,000. The bill would also require the State Administrator of Elections or the procurement officer for the State Board of Elections to disclose and request for proposals or invitation for bids of any value to the State Board of Elections. Procurement contracts would still be approved by the Board of Public Works, as is currently the standard, but would be initially vetted by the State Board of Elections. This would not apply to emergency procurements made less than 45 days before a primary or general election. Transparency around our election systems and processes is essential to maintaining trust and confidence in our elections. Adding this step to our procurement process would promote transparency in the procurement process while heightening standards in that process. You will find letters of support in your floor system for this bill from Common Cause Maryland, the League of Women Voters, and the Maryland Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of House Bill 752. You do have my written testimony. I think the good delegate did a great job of explaining the bill. Essentially, this is about good government, open government, transparency. We have a lot of contracts that oblige county funds. As you know, counties contribute a significant amount to election-related systems. And so we think that this is all about making sure that everybody is in the loop and aware of what's happening. I think it makes a lot of sense for the state board, the members of the state board, to be able to weigh in on these large procurement and contract decisions before they go to the Board of Public Works, again, so that there is transparency, everybody knows what's happening, and that hopefully that information can get back to counties and that they have some input as well. So with that, we'd ask for a favorable report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 752. House Bill 616, Delegate Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, Committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Darrell Barnes. I am here to present House Bill 616, Election Law Early Voting Number of Days. I will not go through my whole testimony because it is in your bill, but let me just state that changes of the number of days of early voting centers are required to be open before a primary general election from 8 days to 5 days, beginning the second Sunday rather than the second Thursday before a primary or general election through the Thursday before the election. Listen, this is a simple bill that I think I am bringing simply because of the merits that our Vice Chair has done a great job of instituting mail-in ballots. Mail-in ballots we have seen has worked immensely. Since then, our participation for early voting has declined. At the end of the day, this is a fiscal responsible bill, nothing more. This is not to suppress the vote. This is not to disenfranchise anyone. And if you can see me, I am a black man, the former chairman of the Maryland Legislative Black Caucus, asking that we reduce the voting from 8 days to 5. In 2013, House Bill 224, which stated that we will go from 6 days for early voting. In 2014, I believe my good friend, delegate or former delegate Alonzo Washington, Senator Washington, put in that we will go to 8 days. Since then, the number of participation for early voting has declined. 505 mail-in ballots were requested, up from 42 4 years ago, which shows that there is a need for participation for early voting. Turnout is lighter in midterm from only 293,000 for midterm election versus 2018 when it was 661,000. The cost of each year will reduce from each polling location around the state from $61,700. So there is a cost savings. As you all know, as elected officials, it costs us time away from our primary jobs. It costs for us to get volunteers, the number of calls for materials. All of those things is a huge cost and a huge fiscal responsibility that I think we can do without, especially with the number of people that are doing early voting. And with that, I ask for a favorable vote.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is David Garris. I'm the president of the Maryland Association of Election Officials, as well as the director of the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections. I'm here to echo the delegate's testimony. There's a substantial fiscal savings that will be realized by passing this bill. The delegate is completely correct that mail-in ballot turnout and vote by mail turnout has been substantially higher. In Anne Arundel County alone, our permanent list of vote by mail voters is over 50,000 voters. So we are definitely experiencing the higher turnout via mail-in voting, and we think we can save the counties and citizens of Maryland some funds and some costs by reducing the number of early voting days. This will also benefit the local boards of elections because this will help us reduce the number of election judges that we need to recruit, as well as during early voting, this will help the election judges because it will reduce the workload that they have to put in. It's quite a feat for somebody that might be in their 70s or 80s to put in 8 straight days of voting and then come back on election day. So if they had a bit of a breather, it would definitely be easier for the election judges themselves. So for those reasons, we hope that you support this legislation.
Thank you. And committee, Mr. Demarinis is here for questions, I presume. Okay. And we have Catherine Berry virtually. We'll let her testify. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Berry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Again, Catherine Berry here representing the Maryland Association of Election Officials Legislative Committee. I did submit our written testimony on behalf of Mayo. It outlines some historical turnout numbers from the 2014 election through 2022. You'll note that the lowest turnout days historically are Saturdays and Sundays. We do recognize that we do not want to give the perception that we're going to decrease access to voters or voting, but instead, as Mr. Harris mentioned, look at some cost savings and then focus on our valuable colleagues and our election judges who work a lot of long hours during the election cycle. And so one of the suggestions, perhaps we look at the reduction to see if there is a pattern after the 2024 presidential election to see if the numbers continue to decrease. So with that being said, I'm always available for answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And committee, are there any questions for Delegate Barnes or any of the witnesses? Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Was there any analysis was done? I mean, I'm seeing the numbers as far as like the Friday. Friday seems like it was a pretty popular day to vote, especially like in the 2020 election. And this would eliminate that day. So, right, it would only be the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the Thursday prior to it.
Yeah, I'm sure you can see in your packet that there are some that says that, you know, the concern is that the days in which we cut, and I am willing to have conversations on how do we structure the days to make it fit. But at the end of the day, I think there are voting mailboxes that will be at each voting location. So in essence, we're not really cutting any days because you still can drop off your ballot. You just can't go inside personally. But I think, you know, whether it's from Sunday to Thursday or whatever the day is, that is the will of the body at that time.
What would the, okay, so you're flexible on that as far as just shortening the days. When would the ballot boxes go out? When would they be installed then?
It's usually at least 30 days before the election day. So
Okay. So they would be there until the election?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing this.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. And that concludes the testimony on House Bill 616. House Bill 580, Delegate Henson. And if you want to bring Melissa Ladd up, and then you have someone else virtually, Ramya Swamy, testifying in support of the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Ladd had an issue and she had to leave.
Okay.
Thank you. May I begin? Thank you, members of the Ways and Means Committee. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. I am Delegate Shanika Henson, here to present House Bill 580, which is a bill that would prohibit firearms being at our polling sites. This bill was passed in the Senate in 2021 with bipartisan support when it was HB 10, and it was sponsored by Senator Waldstreicher and the Senate President. I'm reintroducing this bill for the committee's consideration this session. Voter intimidation and suppression is a civil rights issue, and it can take many forms, from creating barriers to accessing the ballot to physical confrontations at polling sites. We understand that Supreme Court decisions have weakened voter rights, but they have strengthened gun rights, and so now is the appropriate time to pass this bill. A poll that was conducted in 2020, a Reuters Ipsos poll, said that 43% of voters were worried about threats of violence or voter intimidation at polling stations before elections. Currently, 10 states expressly prohibit openly carrying guns at polling places. Included in those states are Arizona, Georgia, Florida, and Texas. In Arizona, and these are some instances where there were instances of intimidation, in Arizona, right-wing extremist groups recruited volunteers to monitor drop boxes in at least one instance in the 2022 election. Voters showed up armed and in tactical gear. In Colorado, a group called the U.S. Election Integrity Project organized volunteers, some of whom may have been armed, to go door to door in search of voter fraud. They allegedly knocked more than 10,000 doors. And in Georgia, activist groups organized unfounded mass challenges to tens of thousands of voters' eligibility. No one should have to worry about their safety when exercising their fundamental right to vote. HB 580 will prohibit the wearing and carrying of firearms within 100 feet of polling sites during an election, but that would exclude law enforcement officers and those who are posted there for security. In Maryland, many of our polling sites are private localities, senior centers, churches, and private halls. Asking each locality and each center to secure its own safety and its own rules regarding firearms is not tenable. A clear statewide prohibition will help support our poll workers as they fulfill their responsibilities of ensuring a safe election. And with that, I ask for your support for HB 580.
Thank you. Is Ramya Swamy in the waiting room? No? Okay. Are there any questions for Delegate Henson? Yes. Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for bringing the bill. I would hope that everyone on this committee would agree with you with the situations that you provided. We don't want folks feeling intimidated. It's supposed to be a happy day, a safe day to be able to go and cast your vote for your favorite candidate. However, this bill's been in front of us a number of years, and I want to bring up a concern that was brought up in previous years, is that in many instances, a concealed carry permit is issued to someone who is a domestic abuse survivor or has someone that's either criminally stalking them, ex-spouse, etc. They carry their weapon to keep them protected. They still live in the community as the abuser. They may go to the polling place. The abuser knows that they're going to be at the polling place. Sometimes they still live in the same community, and that's an opportunity for them to confront them. So my question is, if someone is legally carrying, has a concealed carry permit, and they're doing so to protect themselves from someone else who also has the same right to be at that polling place, why would you exclude that very, very small window of population from this bill, and not give them an exemption?
I did consider making an exception for survivors of domestic violence who have a permit for that reason, but we did abolish making those sorts of distinctions. We now are that state that has the shall carry type of language. So I don't know that we are tracking who's a survivor of abuse when we're issuing conceal and carry permits. So I think that it would be unmanageable to do that, Delegate.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And if there's a way to consider that, I'd like it to be addressed. Thank you.
Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Back in 2018, actually, I got a death threat. That's why I got my concealed wear permit. This guy was for real. He threatened my life and the governor's life. The day of the inauguration, I don't know if anybody knew it, but there were snipers all around because of this guy. That's a heck of a feeling when somebody says they're going to kill you. Now, don't you believe that I should have the right to protect myself at the polling place if I need to?
Thank you for the question, and I'm very sorry to hear what's happened to you. And in years past, when I've introduced the bill, you've shared that story, and I appreciate you making that a part of the record. I do think that everyone should feel safe at our polling locations, and it shouldn't be on a person's own responsibility to seek a permit to purchase a gun to be safe at our polling locations. And I think that in other bills and other instances, we address safety in total at our polls, but I do think that when we're talking about safety, we want that to be in the hands of the professionals who are trained to do that. I certainly wouldn't want you to have to draw and fire any firearms to protect your own safety. I would like our law enforcement to keep you safe, and I trust them to do that.
Okay, I agree with you on some of that, but the only thing is, if the police are not around, which they're not no more, it used to be there used to be a police officer at every polling place, are not there no more, at least in my district. So what happens if I need to protect myself and I can't have my weapon on me because of, this bill passing? Now, this guy is going to know if this bill passes, hey, I know where, I'm not just going to say me, but any of the elected officials, they can be working a poll and they're not going to be able to carry a weapon.
I think that it would make polling places similar to other places where weapons are banned. For instance, this building we're in right now, people don't have the ability to bring their private firearms here. It's been clear in our state regulations and in court decisions that we have certain places that are considered sensitive places, and we will use law enforcement resources to protect those places, but we won't ask members of the public to be a part of that force.
I agree with you, but there's one difference. We have metal detectors out front. We have security around front. I mean, it protects us. And we drive into a garage, with a steel door. There's a whole lot of difference between that and standing around a pole.
It would be similar then if the parallel is more appropriate for you to being at a school, which would prohibit a person from bringing their firearms because those are gun-free zones.
I understand. But if you're allowed to in certain areas, I understand what you're saying as far as open carry. I think that's just horrendous. If I'm going to walk around with a shotgun strapped to my shoulder, I agree with you. That's unconscionable. But if I have a weapon on me and I'm allowed to carry it and you don't know it, what is the problem? That's what I don't understand.
Sure, I think there are two problems. The first is voter intimidation. The percentage of people, the 43% of people who express their fear about going to cast their votes in the 2022 election, we want to make sure that people understand we are protecting them here in Maryland. That means from their neighbors, that means from people who have a different political view, that means from anyone who may want to bring their gun into a voting center. So it is that fear that we are trying to assuage so that people, they have their fundamental right to vote intact, because we know intimidation can be a powerful barrier to exercising that right to vote. And then the second is the matter of safety. We want our law enforcement officers who we trust and we train to keep people safe in those spaces. We don't want to deputize members of the public to have that responsibility.
I agree with you. I don't want to be deputized either, but the thing of it is, if I have my weapon on me, you are not going to know it because it is concealed. So how am I going to intimidate someone if I have a concealed weapon on me?
I think you're speaking about the second factor, and that's the actual safety. If you have your weapon on you, I don't want you to feel compelled to draw it and discharge it. I want the law enforcement officers that we train and we trust to handle that responsibility.
We can agree to disagree. I'll say that.
Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you, Delegate Henson. Next, calling up the unfavorables, Mark Pennick, Katie Novotny, Brent Amsba, and Walt Freer.
Mark is unavailable. He
Okay.
Sends his greetings. He's
Okay.
over in the Senate.
Okay, thank you. And Brent Amsba is virtual, and so is Walt Freer. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Katie Novotny. I come before you today as the Vice President of Maryland Shall Issue. I encourage you to read our extensive written testimony that details numerous legal issues with this bill. So this bill prohibits carry within 100 feet of a polling place during an election. It includes the provision for an exemption where three things must happen. The individual is legally in possession of a firearm, the residence of the individual is within 100 feet, and the individual is transferring the firearm to the individual's residence or vehicle. So there's no exception for someone who lives within 100 feet of the polling place to simply have possession of this inside their home. There is no exception for someone traveling down a public sidewalk or a public road legally in possession of their firearm. In previous years, there were amendments introduced to address these issues, and those are absent this year. And as I said, all with the word "and," all must apply for this exemption to apply. There's no provisions for any other legal transport within 100 feet. And under Bruin and Heller, this is unconstitutional. People have a right to self-defense within their home, and they have a general right to carry for self-defense outside the home as well. Bruin does not allow for such broad restrictions surrounding a location. And 14 states currently limit possession at a polling place, yet no state goes this far. They are generally prohibitions against posting up at a polling location. Also, calling a polling station is vague. Is this meant to include ballot drop boxes? If so, it makes the scope of this bill incredibly tremendous, and we would request an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Brent Amsba with us virtually, or Walt Freer? Okay. Whenever you're ready, go ahead. You're on mute.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and City delegates. My name is Walt Freer. I've had the privilege to serve a fellow Marylander as a professional gunsmith for 25 years. My clients don't just come from one political party or ideology, they come from all walks of life. Maryland has a rainbow of diversity when it comes to firearm ownership. Passing legislation which prohibits law-abiding criminals from defending themselves in public just makes them and everyone else more vulnerable to those willing to do mass murder. Studies show that restricting or prohibiting citizens' ability will actually encourage attacks. Virtually every mass murderer who has left a manifesto has stated that they chose their intended targets and victims because the area deemed by the government to be a gun-free zone, when in fact, we all know it is more than just a good guys and good gals gun-free zone. And now they were able to commit mass murder with little or no resistance. The bottom line is this. Based on the number of permit holders nationwide defined in states that permitless carry, we estimate more than 8 million people who are not law enforcement carry firearms every day in the United States for self-defense. And if them doing so is a danger to society, we would know about it, but it's not. And if a polling place is going to be deemed a sensitive area, they need to follow the example set by this state house, which is equipped with armed guards and metal detectors at its point of entry. That level of security is the priority that I believe the location cannot and should not be classified as a sensitive area. Restricting or prohibiting a victim's ability to defend themselves has never stopped a violent attack. I oppose this legislation and I request an unfavorable report. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is the other individual in there? Okay, no. Committee, are there any questions? Delegate Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was just looking, and I was actually in Texas recently, but I do see online that there are six states that do prohibit concealed carry at polling locations. So this is definitely something that does happen. But you raised some things in your remarks in terms of clarification. So I wanted to ask you if some of the language that maybe seems a little gray could be clarified. Would you still be opposed to this bill?
So in the Bruin decision, it lists inside polling places as an area that has had historic.
I'm sorry, I want a yes or no question because I don't want to get involved in the Bruin because that's a very So would you, if we were able to clarify some of the key concerns in terms of the convolution around whether it's a polling drop box, what have you, would you be okay with this bill passing?
Potentially, depending on what they were and what the clarifications were.
And what specific clarifications in terms of like maybe 2 or 3 that really stand out that you would want to see?
So defining polling place, in the previous bill testimony, actually, they kind of referred to, the drop boxes as maybe being considered part of the polling place. So is that included? Because then that's very, very broad. We obviously don't want people, doing voter intimidation, standing at a drop box. But, if someone in the course of their day, they have a wear and carry permit and they're carrying, I don't see a problem with them, driving by, dropping off at their drop box. We don't want to discourage people to do that. You obviously don't want people open carry and posting up. You know, the 100-yard stuff, or sorry, 100 feet, previous versions of the bill had clarified that language. And, you know, those were excellent amendments that were done previously. So we'd love to see that again. We won't challenge, we don't challenge immediately inside, because there is now case law that says immediately inside is, you know, is acceptable. But a lot of this language around it, getting cleaned up would go a long ways into, you know, having us not oppose it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 580. Delegate Gross, oh, I'm sorry, you had, no. Okay, I apologize. Calling House Bill 642, Delegate Grossman. And Catherine Berry is here virtually.
You ready?
Is this your first bill presentation?
Yes.
Yay!
Actually, it's my first 3, though, so
know.
we're gonna
Boom,
hang
boom,
for a
boom,
couple
boom.
minutes. Go
All
big
right.
or go home.
Right, whenever you're ready.
All right, great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and colleagues of the greatest committee of all time. For the record, my name is Brooke Grossman, and I am here to testify in favor of and seek a favorable report for HB 642, Election Law Recount Procedures. HB 642 will provide an overdue update to Maryland recount laws. In recent years, we've had a number of extraordinary close elections. These include races for Baltimore County Executive in 2018 and Montgomery County Executive in 2018 and again in 2022. This bill would simplify Maryland's recount law, which should be revised as such. First, a rescan of 4 options. Sorry, I'll say it in a way hopefully that makes sense. It seems straightforward and then gets complicated. A rescan of voted paper ballots involved in the recount using precinct tabulators and/or high-speed scanner, if available, to reproduce early voting, precinct, or mail-in or provisional ballots and canvass totals, or conduct a manual recount of voted paper ballots involved in the recount. Third, a manual tabulation of printed reports from early voting, election day, and mail-in and provisional ballot canvasses. Under this option, printed reports from the precinct tabulators and high-speed scanners are examined and manually tabulated. Fourth would be another recount method approved only by the State Board of Elections Administrator. This bill would also clarify that candidates may request either full or partial recounts of votes. Next is where we get into what again feels like a complicated situation, so I'm going to try to explain it as clearly as possible, and if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. Additionally, this bill requires that local boards of election maintain standards for scanning and storing internet-delivered ballots. Internet ballots present challenges for the voter. The voter needs to have a printer, paper, toner, address envelopes, pay postage, and/or drop off at a drop box or hand deliver an internet-printed ballot to the Board of Elections. Internet ballots also present challenges on the receiving end. These paper ballots cannot be scanned into the Board of Elections scanning system, which requires a bipartisan team to review and transcribe internet ballots that can be scanned into the ballot system. This bill would specifically require, for the purpose of recount, that those internet ballots maintain the original source documents for any ballot and keeps these sheets batched with the reproduced scanned ballot. So in the case of a recount, the original written ballot would be not tabulated, but housed with the scanned ballot for ease of that recount. And it would also state that when, in the case of a recount, we would only rely on the original source documents in a manual recount. To make the certification of our election results go smoothly, this change on the recount procedures establishes a process with clear framework for Board of Elections to follow. And with that, I will request a favorable report for HB 0642, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Ms. Berry, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to members of the committee. For the record, my name is Catherine Berry, representing the Maryland Association of Election Officials Legislative Committee. So we just had some comments about recounts because they are rare, but as the delegate said, we have had some unique circumstances in the past
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 642. Moving on to Delegate Grossman's House Bill 643, and you do have two folks virtually, Liza Smith and Catherine Berry, again for information. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and colleagues of the Ways and Means Committee, for the record, I am Delegate Brooke Grossman. I am here to testify on behalf of House Bill 0643, Election Law, Insufficient Number of Candidates for the Primary Election. The purpose of this bill is to ensure that democracy works, putting the decision of who represents citizens of Maryland where it belongs in the hands of the voters and not in the hands of a select few individuals. In 1998, an individual withdrew their candidacy at the last minute, but had already recruited a friend that they had hoped would succeed them in the House. In the final hours before the filing deadline for 2022 primary elections, an incumbent withdrew their candidacy for office and instead filed for another. Because no other candidate could get to Annapolis in time to file for the deadline, the County Central Committee ultimately selected the party's nominee. These examples clearly illustrate a loophole that prevents voters from choosing their representatives. HB 0643 would ensure that new leaders are elected by the voters rather than selected. HB 643 proposes only, and I want to say that again, only if a filed candidate dies or withdraws within 48 hours of the filing deadline. This deadline then would be extended by 7 days. A delay would give prospective candidates ample time to make a carefully considered decision to file their paperwork. I'm not going to go into all of the deadline kind of workings there, but I did submit that with my written testimony of what the written or the 7-day extension would look like. And at the end of the 7-day extension would still provide 21 days from the close of that extension to the date that SBE would display candidates on a website, which feels like still ample amount of time to get that done. HB 643 would offer modest flexibility while being a minimal burden to our election system, and our democracy would benefit from this legislation. And before I answer questions, I did want to point out, based upon questions that the cross-file of this bill received in its presentation last week, that on page 3, top of page 3, number 2, I would seek to put in an amendment to strike that because it makes it a little unclear. It makes it sound as if it would be allowing this to happen for if there were not enough candidates filed, and that's not the sense of or the intent of this bill. It is only if someone were to die or to be disqualified or withdraw 48 hours before the filing deadline. And with that, I will turn it over.
Thank you. Do we have Liza Smith? Or go ahead, Ms. Berry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, Catherine Berry, on behalf of Mayo. We just wanted to make the committee aware of the coordinated effort that it takes after the candidate filing deadline. As you may know, the candidate filing period is 1 year in length, so we just opened the candidate filing period for 2024. And the days following the candidate filing deadline as is now, we have very strict timelines in regards to preparing the ballots. That includes, proofing the ballots, getting the ballots onto the ballot paper, getting them to our vendor, giving our vendor time to print all of the ballots. Something we were faced with in 2022 is a historic number of pages of ballots in some of our local boards, and that added a lot of stress on the vendors for printing the ballots to the local boards when we were proofing them, and then finally to the state board of elections, to the folks that put the ballots all together. And we just don't want to risk having any additional delays or challenges in the election preparation process, because we do take a lot of meticulous time to get that all together. So we just don't want to add any risk to the rest of the process. So thank you, Madam Chair. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Is Liza Smith here? Yep. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Smith.
Hi. Again, thank you for giving me this opportunity to testify on behalf of Montgomery County Unionist Democratic Club. For the record, my name is Lisa Smith. I am also an elected member of Montgomery County Democrat Central Committee. I represent WTC urges passage of HB 643. I would like to point out that this really is a no harm type bill. Prior person mentioned about a time situation, but in recent situation, it took about 7 days before the Central Committee appointed someone to fill that position on the ballot. HB 643 was sure that every citizen, not only party insider like myself, would have an equal chance to run for office when a sudden opening occurs. The proposed 7-day extension of the filing deadline would advance democracy by allowing time for widespread public notice of a last-minute opening, thus creating opportunity for candidates who might consider running to do so, rather than having a valid opening filled by political parties' central committee. We ask for your support for HB 643 and strongly urge a favorable committee report. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Committee, do we have any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 643. And to round it out, House Bill 651, whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and colleagues of the greatest committee of all time, Ways and Means. I will say, I am, for the record, Delegate Brooke Grossman, and I'm here to testify on behalf of HB 0651, Renters Property Tax Relief Program. And while I know we are not meant to fall in love with the bill, I am definitely in like with this one. After receiving feedback from SDAT, this bill in the form that you have will have amendments submitted. They unfortunately were not ready for today, but we'll get them to the committee as soon as they are. I'm going to present as the bill would be amended. As amended, the provision that SDAT reevaluate income eligibility for renters on a 5-year schedule will be removed, and the scope of the requested change outlined in the bill will only apply to non-senior, non-disabled Maryland renters. So Maryland renters that are not receiving housing subsidy, non-disabled, and non-senior. So under the current eligibility requirements, a non-senior, non-disabled renter is only eligible for tax credit if they do not receive federal, state, or housing subsidy and do not live in public housing. Additionally, these renters must be below the poverty level and have at least one minor under the age of 18 living in their household. For example, the current income eligibility for a 2-person household, which likely would be a single-parent household, is $17,420 per year. This would equate to the parent working full-time in an $8.38 an hour job. And according to 2023 fair market rent guidelines generated by HUD, the fair market cost for a 1-bedroom apartment, assuming parent may sleep on the couch and child has a bedroom, is $1,126 per month. That would be 78% of the annual income of an eligible renter currently under the $17,420 income threshold. HB 0651 would increase the eligibility limits for non-senior and non-disabled renters by 58% over the current poverty threshold, creating an opportunity for low-income households to take advantage of this credit. Using the same example above, a single-parent household working in a minimum wage job earning $27,560 annually, renting a fair market 1-bedroom apartment, still 49% of their total income, would be eligible for this credit. We heard testimony last week from working families that rely on credits like this one to make ends meet to support their basic needs. HB 651 would raise the income thresholds for family sizes 3 to 8 to the following levels. A family of 3, $34,696 annually. A family of 4, $41,870. A family of 5, $49,043. A family of 6, $56,216. A family of 7, $63,389. And a family of 8, $70,562. This increase is certainly not meant to add a different tax bracket to this rental credit, but actually to make this rental credit available to our low-income households. While SDAT is unable to testify on the bill today, we have been working closely together to establish these numbers, and they have indicated that being able to implement these changes would have a minimal operational impact on their division and would be easy to supplement. Or implement, I'm sorry. The other piece of the amendment, as the bill is currently written, it says would go into effect in 2023, and this would actually go into effect as amended January 2024 to align with their calendar year.
There were two people signed up in favor, Isadora Stern and Leo Ariza. So if you guys could come up, please. You can stay there. Yeah. And whoever would like to go first for 2 minutes, and then we'll do questions.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Isadora Stern. I'm a policy manager with Economic Action Maryland, formerly the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. We are a statewide nonprofit organization. We work to advance economic equity in Maryland's most vulnerable communities through our research, our direct service, and our advocacy. We have several direct service programs that are focused on creating access to safe, affordable housing and removing barriers to economic well-being that disproportionately affect low-income people and communities of color. One of our programs, SOAR, which stands for Securing Older Adult Resources, works to improve the financial well-being of older adults. Our SOAR counselors are active in the community through our community outreach programs and work with individuals to provide financial coaching and counseling in order to secure tax credits like the one that Delegate has brought before you, to take money off the table and put that in our older adults' pockets. A large part of this work is awareness raising and promotion of the renter's tax credit and assistance with the application process. In 2022, we returned over $88,000 in tax credits for financially fragile older adults, and renters who received the tax credit had an average return of between $300 and $500 annually. We know that inflation is at a 40-year high, and income is not keeping pace. This bill would address that and give us an opportunity to expand eligibility requirements and allow more low-income people access to this life-saving credit. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, distinguished members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, my name is Leo Arriaza. I'm a case manager for the SOAR program for Economic Action Maryland. And we are here to ask kindly for the support for Bill 651. And the reason of that is being that inflation is a variable that affects everybody equally and affects mostly the people who are more in need. Low-income communities in Maryland, they are in need of this tax credit. I have been a witness of the great positive impact that the tax credit has made in a lot of communities and families in the state of Maryland because I work directly with those communities. And they have found relief in the rental tax credit. However, there is a group of people who, because of the current eligibility income guidelines, was unable to have access to the tax credit. So we believe that this bill allow the Department of Assessment and Taxation to report and assess inflation and report it to the General Assembly. It will give a great chance to make the eligibility guideline more accessible for those who are in need. And I would like to say thank you so much for your consideration and respectfully ask for your support for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 651. Delegate Feldmark, House Bill 665. And you have a Dan Ellis, Claudia Wilson Randall, Isadora Stern, and yep, I didn't want to mispronounce your name again.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, committee members. Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Delegate Jessica Feldmark. It is my pleasure to be here presenting House Bill 665. For those of you who have been on the committee, you will recall that the past couple years I've had bills focused on the homeowner's property tax credit and really focusing on increasing access and ease of application to streamline and simplify the application process, reducing the administrative burden on homeowners trying to avail themselves of this credit, and eliminating duplication of information that has to be submitted. What this bill does is actually says, okay, let's take a step back from the specific proposals and ask SDAT and the Comptroller's Office to work together, recognizing the specific goals to increase access, raise awareness, and simplify the application process, and figure out how these two agencies can work together to really make these tax credits more accessible, make sure that our residents who are eligible for them are able to utilize them. So this started as a look at the homeowner's tax credit, and we had some very productive conversations over the interim. I think there is definitely conceptual agreement with the goals. There are some technology challenges and other sort of practical challenges that we need these agencies to take the time to work through. But in the conversations over the interim, the suggestion was made, rather than focusing just on the homeowner's tax credit, to expand this and look at all of the tax credits which SDAT administers, where there may be some room for improvement and enhancement with better collaboration with the Comptroller's Office. So looking at not just the homeowner's tax credit, but also the homestead tax credit, the renter's tax credit, which we just heard about, as well as the property tax exemption for disabled veterans and active duty service members and surviving spouses. Particularly where there may be income eligibility, where information is already being collected by the Comptroller's Office, and an opportunity to better coordinate and streamline the process so that we're not asking folks to apply again, resubmitting information that they've already submitted to the state. So it's asking these agencies to work together and give a report, a joint report, of their findings and recommendations by December 1st of this year. And we can look forward to hopefully doing something productive with that to make a difference next session. So I ask for your favorable report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Delegate Feldmark? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Delegate Feldmark. If we could have Dan Ellis, Claudia Wilson Randall, Isadora Stern, and Leo Ariza, please come forward.
I think Claudia and Dan might be upstairs.
Oh, okay. Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Isadora Stern, and I'm a policy manager with Economic Action Maryland. I already gave you all some details about the programs that we work to help support low-income individuals maintain housing in communities, especially for our older adults. These are people who are longtime community members. They are tenants of their community, and we believe that we should be finding as many possibilities for these people to have access to life-saving credits that keep them housed and the ability to age in place with dignity. This bill would ask the Comptroller and SDAT to work together in order to ease the application process. Our SOAR team works with hundreds of applicants every year. We have an individual website that helps people understand their rights. We have dozens of community engagement opportunities where our counselors are in the community educating people constantly. But older adults are a really sensitive population, and the more of a burden we can take off of them would absolutely help this process and help them stay in the communities where we think they deserve to age in place. Thank you.
Are you Claudia Wilson Randall? Okay, sit right there. He can go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and distinguished members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, again, my name is Leo Riaza. I'm the case manager for the SOAR program, striving to provide resources for older adults with Economic Action Maryland. We are here to ask kindly for the support for Bill 665 because we strongly believe that this bill is going to contribute to create awareness about the renter's tax credits and the homeowner's tax credit. As we speak, as somebody who directly interact with constituents from all over Maryland, you might be surprised at how people are unaware of the tax credit, how they don't have information, particularly older adults, and also other minority groups that don't have access to this information. So we strongly believe that this bill will contribute to create a strong awareness and also to facilitate the application process. For this, I just want to say thank you for your time and consideration.
Atterbury and members of the Ways and Means Committee, thank you so much for your patience today. My name is Claudia Wilson Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland. We're an organization that focuses on affordable housing, housing counseling, as well as community-based nonprofits across the state of Maryland. And our mission is to promote, strengthen, and advocate for the community development sector throughout the state, urban, suburban, and rural communities. House Bill 665 would require the Comptroller and SDAT to identify ways that the two agencies could work together to enhance access to the property tax credits. As my colleagues have already spoken, this is something that Community Development Network of Maryland has been working on for the last 10 years. And we really have urged the departments to figure out ways that they could jointly do outreach and jointly identify people who are eligible for the tax credits across the state. We hear again and again from communities from the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, that many people simply don't know that these tax credits exist. And sometimes when they do know they exist and they get it for 1 year, there may be a health crisis, there may be a child who leaves, there may be a spouse who dies, and they fall out, right? So for me, figuring out strategies where, again, maybe people over 70, once they've got it, we keep letting them get it. But the bureaucracy and entanglements that people face in accessing this in terms of filling out forms, we hear about it year after year. When you talk to the State Department of Assessment and Taxation, there's a lot of frustration about systems. You hear about federal priorities, but I think we as a body can all do better to figure out ways that people can benefit from these tax credits. Thank you.
Did Dan Ellis enter the room? Nope. Okay.
He's over in the Senate.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions, committee, for Delegate Feldmark or any of the other witnesses? Okay. Oh, nope. Sorry, I see you. Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for your testimony and Delegate Feldmark for bringing this to our attention. I'm particularly interested in asking Ms. Randall with the Community Development Network with an emphasis on seniors. In my district, we're getting a lot of seniors who are very concerned because they're living on a limited income and they are just sort of distraught because a lot of things are happening. How do you see this proposed legislation assisting the population I've just described? Well, if that's difficult, I mean, anyone could answer, but I know that you're with the Community Development Network.
I think that we'll need to take a no wrong door approach so that when people are coming for assistance for benefits of one kind, that we are allowed to give them benefits of all kinds. So, for example, what you'd want is for people maybe accessing food, maybe people who are getting their taxes done to be at the same time have the access to these tax credits. So I mean, I think there are a lot of ways that this could work. I also think that benefit screening, there's, you know, when the State Department of Assessments says that people's income needs to be verified annually. This is true for other programs that apply to seniors, but you could see that once you have your income verified for that year, that then you could just keep rolling and get all those benefits. The other issue is cognitive decline, right? Right. So we have a lot of seniors who maybe experience, you know, high blood pressure, chronic disease. So yeah, they might have forgotten to file that form. And I think we can do better about, you know, frankly, the predators in our communities, people looking to take money from our seniors, they're good at finding people and finding people who are qualified, right? They figure it out. So we can figure this out. And it's going to take both agencies to work with each other to, you know, but once somebody's income is certified for that year and they're on Social Security, we can't have them get the benefit. Like, we should be able to do that, and electronically.
Excellent
anything
response.
you guys
Thank
want
you
to
very
add?
much. That's fine. Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 665, House Bill 592, Delegate Watson, and whoever you would like to bring up with you.
Good afternoon. Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair is not here, and members of the Ways and Means Committee, thank you for allowing me to present House Bill 592, which is a reintroduction of House Bill 1282, which your committee heard in 2022. This legislation now defines value-added agriculture improvements as a subclass of property. While being a farmer has always been difficult, it has really been very difficult in the last several years, from the supply chain challenges to inflation and labor shortages. It's a tremendously arduous time to be in agriculture. HB 592 seeks to minimize the strain on many of the farms across the state. HB 592 requires SSTAT to recognize these value-added industries as what they are, agricultural endeavors. Farm breweries, wineries, distilleries, creameries, and others have emerged as a way for agricultural operations to further support themselves, turning the barley they grow into beer, or grapes they grow into wine, or wheat into distilled spirits. Today, you will hear from an alcohol manufacturer, the Farm Bureau, and others about why this legislation is so important to their livelihoods, and I respectfully request the committee adopt a favorable report on House Bill 592.
Good afternoon. Matthew Boley of RWL here on behalf of Maryland's breweries, wineries, and distilleries in support of House Bill 592. This committee heard this bill last year, and you will hear some of the same concerns that you did last year, including the size of the fiscal note, which, just as last year, I think may be based on some faulty assumptions and a stretch of some of the language in the bill. However, I am here to stress that the problem of extraordinary assessments in ag is persisting, and they need relief. The farmers you will hear from need a solution to this problem, and the other stakeholder concerns you will hear behind us, I believe, are well intended. I'm committed to working with them and ensuring our farmers achieve adequate relief. Particularly, I think we may be seeing a greater willingness from SSTAT to engage with us on this issue in a more collaborative manner, and I appreciate that, but we need to see a willingness to work toward a consensus and solution on this matter, one that needs to be effectuated this legislative session. One other theme that may be present here is that as times change, as industries change and evolve, we must ensure that our laws, policies, practices, and procedures keep up with industry changes. Certainly, agriculture has evolved over the last 50 years, and this underscores why I think that SSTAT needs to be directed on this matter.
If we want to preserve agriculture in Maryland, to prevent more family farms from being turned into subdivisions, warehouses, or anything other than agriculture, we need to work together and solve this problem this year. I thank you for your time and attention to this matter and urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Colby Ferguson on behalf of Maryland Farm Bureau. And we support this bill again this year. We hope we can move this across the finish line. Honestly, when I heard about what was going on, I live in Frederick County, and so actually my barns aren't even assessed at all in Frederick County. So I was like, what's going on? You'll hear from a couple of farmers that of what's happened to them in their counties. But the challenge that we've had is that we're trying to meet the demand of the local public and the demand that we have through the legislature to grow locally, to offer local to the citizens of Maryland. And you invest all this time and money. You take a barn that used to milk cows and turn it into a way to value add that's not milking cows anymore because that's not profitable. So they go into another value added venue, and then to add insult to injury with all that cost, all of a sudden get reassessed as a commercial use instead of it staying as a barn as it's been for 80, 90 years of existence. And so what we're trying to do is to level the playing field. We did this decades ago with the agricultural assessment for the land and said, hey, if it's farming, whether it's in Prince George's County or Garrett County, it's worth the same amount. The barns should be the same way. If it's a bank barn in Southern Maryland or a bank barn in Garrett County or a bank barn in Prince George's County, it's still a bank barn. It should be assessed the same way. And that's what we're trying to do here, is trying to get these assessments to be level so we don't say, okay, well, yeah, that property, if ever sold for development, is going to be worth more in Prince George's than it is in Kent. But it's still an active farm, and they need to continue to be productive. So with that, we'd ask for a favorable report, and I'll answer any questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Pam Gigante, and along with my husband Mark, own 61 Vineyard in Damascus, where we have lived for 30 plus years. We opened our winery in October of 21, and we currently have 12 employees. First, I'd like to thank the committee for hearing my testimony and Delegate Watson for sponsoring this bill. I'm here to ask you to pass HB 592 for our vineyard, as well as all the wonderful value-added farm wineries in our state, and there are many. Since I last visited you here in February of 22, where I noted that SSTAT had visited our farm, I have in fact been issued a revised tax bill. I requested a copy of the worksheet for the property, and it showed that 2 acres of our 47-acre farm was reassessed to a commercial rate. We were informed that our bill was just the beginning of a 3-year phase-in of increase. One year, this past year was 35% increase over the prior year. No information's been given on the final valuation, so I'm assuming that this year I will be assessed an additional 35% and next year as well, based on what they did last year. Please know that we did not add any buildings to this property. Our barns were in existence, one for 60 years, one for 30. These buildings house our tasting room and our production facility. We are coming off of a couple of very expensive years of price increases due to COVID. Both shipping and materials have gone up, sometimes upwards of 300% over what the prices should have been. This is a hardship for our vineyard as well as every other vineyard in the state. Your support of this legislation will go a long way in getting us back to knowing what our costs will be on the tax side, and most importantly, being able to manage those costs. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Shelby Watson Hampton, and I am Director of the Southern Maryland Agricultural Development Commission, also known as SMATIC, and I'm here to ask for a favorable report for HB 592. The importance of the ability of our farmers to be able to make a living from their farm businesses cannot be overstated, and the state's current approach to ag assessment directly threatens that. It seems to many farmers and agricultural industry professionals that the ag improvements and assessments began to skyrocket unexplainably a few years ago. When questioned, the reasons given by the department were that these value-added farms seem to be generating more money and that because of their on-farm improvements should be assessed at a higher rate without the ag use assessment. Now, these buildings are not Walmarts or 7-Elevens or any other commercial structure. These buildings are located on farms, owned by farmers, and being used for farm use. Thus, they should be assessed and taxed under the agricultural use tax rate as they always have been previously. Alleviating this sudden and unnecessary tax increase for our farms will allow them to operate their local businesses with peace of mind and in a more regulatory-friendly environment as they continue to boost the agricultural economy within their communities across the state. Considering that the population of the state of Maryland is a little over 6 million people, and we only have roughly 12,000 farms, we want to do what we can to ensure their survival. These farms provide fresh and shelf-stable local products for all of us and ensure open space in a state that is heavily under development. Farmers face a lot of challenges: weather, labor shortages, and increasing cost of living, stringent permitting and regulatory processes, and others. Let us not add an undue tax burden to their worries as well. I humbly request that the committee support HB 592 and give it a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury and Ways and Means Committee. My name is Howie Figge. We are the owners of Mary Acres Farm. We have some beef, we board horses, and we also make a lot of hay. And I want to thank Delegate Watson for introducing this bill because we need House Bill 592. From personal experience, last year our tax assessment went from $717,000 to $1,640,000. In the 3-year increase period, that's an increase of $923,000. That is twice the previous value. The land value increased to $129,300, which is somewhat understandable, but agricultural land is not increasing at the rate that we are assessed. The buildings went from $394,200 to $1,187,900, an increase of $793,700. Farm buildings do not increase in value like that. Please understand that farmers that farm for a living cannot make a change in their budgets to handle an increase like that, and the buildings that are well maintained, but they're still agricultural buildings and they're still very old. None of these were new buildings. We should not be punished for doing a good job with our buildings and farm properties. We are the viewscapes that the ag preservation is known for, and we need to be preserved financially as well. Thankfully, we appealed the assessment and the increase was reduced, but we should not have to have that burden on top of all we do. Thank you all very much.
Questions from the committee? Delegate Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Watson, for the bill. As yes, this has been before us before, and I'm trying to wrap my arms around it. I think the gentleman to my right, you had stated that we need to level the playing field for assessments. And basically, you said a barn is a barn, regardless of wherever that barn is, in Prince George's County or wherever. But there do I say a house is not just a house, because it differs from location to location. So how would we assess a barn in Prince George's County that is different than the barn in Western Maryland?
So currently, the way it's being done is it's looked at the value of the property. And if that structure adds more value to the property, then they reassess it more. So if I had a 5,000 square foot barn in Garrett County, and I had the exact same 5,000 square foot barn in Howard County or Prince George's County, the value of the land is more because there's more development pressure there than there would be in Garrett County or Kent County or somewhere like that. So what SNAT is doing is saying, okay, that structure makes that property more desirable, so therefore we should assess it higher because it's going to be worth more if that farmer ever sells it versus if it was in Garrett County. That's the challenge we have. If that was the way it was going to be, then all ag land, whether it was in Prince George's, so right now the way the current law is that I have 100 acres of farmland in Prince George's County or 100 acres of farmland in St. Mary's County or 100 acres of farmland in Garrett County, it's all assessed the exact same amount. Even though the value is much higher if I was ever to sell it for development. That's what the problem of this is that these barns, these structures that we're using to farm are being assessed at different rates in different parts of the state. And what this bill does is try to level that out to say, okay, if it's agriculture in the state of Maryland, it's agriculture, and the improvements should be done the same way.
Okay, so my friend who is the winery, so I'm trying to understand this, and I have a ton of questions. I know SDAT is coming after you guys, but in your mind, what's a fair assessment as far as leveling the playing field?
So just know that our barn that our tasting room is an 60 to 80-year-old cinder block building. It was gray cinder block. It has a roof that is that old, that is galvanized metal, and I don't know that it has much value. We painted it. We added some more concrete on the floor. We didn't replace the windows. We did put some wood on the ceiling and a little bit on the wall, but we really, when you go in there, you can feel that barn. It is the same, and I don't know why. I did notice on the notes that they were charging me for concrete patio. You know, when somebody comes out to the farm and they want to enjoy a glass of wine, I would like to put them on a concrete patio in case it's a rainy day and maybe it's a little muddy. They might prefer it as well. And that we do have a rather large concrete patio outside, and we were charged for that. So I don't know what that's worth. I know what it costs me to put it in, but it's really not that much money. So I don't know that the value should be any different, hardly at all, from when I purchased the farm.
But let me just ask my last question, Madam Chair. Wouldn't you agree that if there's any type of improvement to any structure, that there should be assessed at a different level? And I ask that question simply because if I add on to my house, I add a room, I add a sunroom, I expand my house, the assessment would be different than the first or the original assessment before I made any type of tenant improvement.
Delegate, may I take a run at that one?
Sure.
Thank you. I think ultimately what, the measuring stick is a good, reasonable question, and I don't know that I have the perfect answer for that yet.
Sure.
I don't think we have been able to obtain the information that we needed previously, but I think, with a new dialogue with SDAT and the other stakeholders, that's something I'm willing to work on and commit to trying to find the most reasonable, equitable measuring stick for these improvements that we can come up with. That also preserves and keeps agriculture and from not being overdeveloped.
That's a reasonable answer, and when SDAT come, we'll ask them what's that reasonable measuring stick. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Fair?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for coming out and presenting. I'm just curious, and anybody can chime in on this question, but do you believe that SDAT has changed its assessment model, or do you believe that it's reacting to the new diversification of the modern farm?
If I could take one quick stab at that.
Please.
So something that the other delegate I wanted to add on too, I know several farms in our area, so we're in southern Prince George's County, so southern Maryland, so the 5 southern Maryland counties. I know 3 farms who have been reassessed. One of them had a over 2,000% increase, and nothing had changed, right? So from one year to the next, it went up 2,000%. How do you plan for that? How do you come up with that money out of pocket? Especially since there was no warning given. You don't know what's coming. Another farm had a 640% increase, and then another one had 190%. So I think it's just the fact that that shows the measuring stick isn't fair. I mean, if someone came up to your house and said, we're reassessing it at a 2,000% increase, you would be a little concerned. So.
Could you get our office any of that information? That would be super helpful to
Absolutely.
know.
I don't have permission to release those names right now, but I can get them for you.
Perfect. I
Yes.
appreciate that. Thank you so much. One final question. On page 2, line 2, under the value-added agricultural definition, it says on actively used farms. Do we have a definition around the word actively used farm?
Take that.
Well, in the agriculture article, it defines what a farm is. And so a working farm is probably the name that we would normally use. But yeah, that was an amendment from last year that Maryland Association of Counties wanted to say, okay, this needs to be on working farms. I don't need somebody to go buy ag land and then turn it into a commercial use and get the quote tax credit. So this is truly for working active farms that are looking to add value to their property, whether it be winery, whether it be a horse operation, whether it be agritourism.
And in your opinion, Mr. Ferguson, is that because farms are forced to diversify due to the current market values of different product?
I wouldn't say they're forced, and the problem of it is that depending on what part of the state you're in, it becomes more advantageous because you need to retain that ownership to get more dollars per acre.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing this bill. Thank you all for your testimony. I have a couple of questions. I guess, largely around the fiscal note. Happy to let anyone chime in, although I think, Mr. Boley, you spoke to this a little bit in your testimony. I believe you raised a concern about some misinterpretation or overly broad interpretation of some of the language in the bill that may have supported the large fiscal note. Can you say a little bit more about what you think might be there, and if maybe there's an opportunity to tighten up that language?
Yes, absolutely, and I appreciate that question. I've been informed, and I'm sure you may hear of it, and from some of our subsequent panels, that under this language proposed in the bill, that it may now, you could be a gas station, and perhaps if you're selling apples from a local farmer, now you could be eligible, for this assessment. That's certainly not the intent here. That's why, from last session when we addressed that question, we included the actively used farm language. And certainly if there, are suggestions or amendments that would further constrain and prohibit, whether it's a gas station, I've also heard, the brewery in a downtown city center now, again, if they sell products from a local nearby farm or whatever the case may be, that's not the intent. And of course, obviously, we want to work with the committee and other stakeholders to come up with the tightest definition possible, to keep this squarely centered on agriculture.
Thank you. And then one other question, the fiscal note raises this issue of potential competitive advantage or disadvantage for similar businesses not located on a farm. And I just wondered if anyone had thoughts on that, specifically as it relates to sort of event space. And related to that, I'm curious about the 200 guest limit, sort of where that number comes from and how that's the right threshold.
Yeah, so that's another sort of byproduct of our conversations with MACO and MML last year. There may be a 200 person seating capacity peg somewhere. I honestly drawn a blank as to where that number may have come from, but we were trying to avoid, I know wedding venues were raised. That was a question we kept hearing. So we want, obviously, any of these facilities, you're going to have seats. If you're going to have people in a facility for a number of hours, you have to have seats. So it's just a question. We were trying to draw that threshold. And I forget if it was having to do with the fire code or something to that extent, but that was the line that we came up with that was going to be agreeable last session.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not a farmer by no means. I have a question. We have roadside stands in my district. Are they treated the same way as like your barn? If they have a roadside stand, that stand, is that assessed different?
So yes and no. A roadside stand, just like a portable stand that you would have just during the season for like fruits and vegetables, no. But if you're a full-blown farm market where you bake pies and you do retail year-round, like we have several of them in Frederick County, those are reassessed differently just for that footprint. But they also know that they went in for a commercial use to have more parking and all that stuff as well. But so it's if it's a small and accessory use to the farm, just to have like where people can come in and buy freezer beef off of you or something like that, then that would probably be in the existing barn. But as far as a dedicated facility for on-farm market, that is assessed differently in different counties. So most counties look at those as commercial. So they would not be in
just trying to
this bill.
clarify, so
That
what
wouldn't
you-
be in this bill.
What you're saying is, if, we have several farms in my district, and they set up roadside stands to sell their produce and stuff. Are they assessed different? And, they're on commercial, they're on a commercial road. Are they, they're agricultural, but they still are set up on a residential, commercial area? Are
Right, they would, we don't want them to be reassessed in the future, and that's why letter, or Roman numeral V's in here to make sure that they're not. But yeah, that was the whole purpose, is right now, we don't believe they are. Of course, we don't know everybody that's being reassessed, but we're trying to make sure that they're not, because we don't consider them to be.
Right, and they're selling stuff from their farm, and it's like you guys, you're selling stuff from your own farm. It might be processed as far as line or whatever, but it's still coming from the farm, am I correct?
Right.
So it's on the same scale.
Right.
Thank you.
Any further questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's some more folks signed up to testify. Favorable with amendment, Justin Fiore, Kevin Canali, Daniel Phillips, Jonathan Glazer. And then we have a favorable in the virtual universe. So whoever wants to start, come on up and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Jonathan Glazer, and I'm the Legislative Director of the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. So before we get into this bill, I want to make sure that all the committee members know that SDAT has not made any changes to the manner in which buildings located on agricultural land are assessed since at least 1974. There have been plenty of arguments made that this industry deserves a new tax break. But I want to end the rumor that SDAT has changed our assessment methodology. Unfortunately, SDAT was not allowed to show up last year to end this rumor, but we're here now. No examples of changes in methodology have ever been presented to the department during the study or in the interim or now. This bill, as written, creates a new class of real property and new valuation methods to grant a new tax benefit for those properties. If the intent of the General Assembly is to create a new tax break for a new class of real property, the department respectfully asks that we have 3 years to implement this to align with our current reassessment cycle. It is very difficult for the department to implement something on an emergency basis as this bill demands. The department notes that this bill, as written, also does not conform with the recommendations made by the study that was mandated under Chapter 643 of the laws of 2022. The department requests that this bill be amended to conform with the recommendations of the study. I know the committee members will have a lot of questions, so I am here. I also have the State Supervisor of Real Property, Dan Phillips, here. He's been here for 34 years, and now I'll turn it on to some of the other panelists.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips, are you just here for questions, or you? Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Justin Fiore here on behalf of the Maryland Municipal League in support of House Bill 592 with amendments. As you kind of heard on the prior panel, I think we're actually all in agreement here that we can do something to help our farmers on properties that make value-added improvements. We're a willing participant in this, but it gets a little bit tricky, especially with the bill's current framework. The trick is in understanding the costs and then keeping them reasonable. The $300 million fiscal note, whether that's the actual number or somewhere below that, we certainly don't really see that as reasonable, and we've gone into full-scale new policy debate here. But between the current definitions as they are and how we would apply the land ag rate to a structure, we're having trouble coming up with good amendments to work within the framework of the bill, understand the costs, keep them reasonable. That's why our amendments fall in line with SDAT's recommendation to create a local property tax credit, allow us to set the definitions. That way, this is clean, practical, and we know what we're doing at the end of the day, but we can make progress for farmers here in Maryland. So with that, we ask for a favorable report with amendments. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kevin Canali here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of House Bill 592 with amendments. I hope that you'll take a look at our written testimony far more in depth than I'm going to present here at the table. You've already heard a lot of back and forth. I just want to emphasize that MACO is more than willing to work with the advocates here, and we've done that for the past year. We've tried to come up with the correct language. However, we've been informed by DLS and SSTAT that the language that we agreed to last year and tried to work on this year doesn't do anything, and that's the reason why you see a $300 million fiscal note. So we certainly want to support our farmers. We understand the need for them to be nimble, to react to different economic conditions, and try to create some value-added industries so they can keep their farms and stay on their farms. But it does get blurry when you start thinking about agriculture versus commercial activity. And that is a new policy debate. It's one that we should have, but I do want to emphasize that we continue to work with the advocates, with the bill sponsors, and we're trying to find a solution here. The bill in front of you just isn't it. It needs some work. There are questions about, what is this rate that will apply to new improvements? That's not defined in law. So again, I think that this does require some work, but we're more than willing to do that and work with the committee to come up with something that I think addresses all concerns and protects against this massive fiscal note that we can't eat at this time. So appreciate the opportunity, and we'd ask for a favorable report with amendments, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'm going to let Ms. Jane Siegler go. She is online, if she is here. Okay, she can go for 2 minutes, and then we'll do questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Jane Siegler. My name for the record is Jane Siegler. I'm here for the Maryland Horse Council, which is the trade association for the horse industry in Maryland. We do support this bill as written because we think it makes an important clarification to the nature of value-added agriculture in Maryland in the property tax context, and we particularly support it because it makes clear that equine activities are part of value-added agriculture in Maryland and therefore should be entitled to the same type of agricultural assessment as other agricultural activities. So we would ask for a favorable report on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, Delegate Barnes?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you guys for your presentation. Listen, I think at the end of the day, the agricultural community is saying that we need to get this fixed. I think, Jonathan, you stated that this assessment has not been changed since 1974. That's a problem in itself, that we must look at this thing holistically. And Mr. Phillips, you've been here for 30 years, that I think it's time that we now look at this thing a little bit more broadly and figure out how are we assessing these properties where it makes sense. I do agree that this bill may not be the fix-all, but I do know that, or do believe that we should look at this during the interim and really put our best foot forward in addressing this. But I want to ask the folks from SSTAT, from an assessment standpoint, and you heard the testimony before you guys, what are you all doing to, at this juncture, to kind of level the playing field as far as assessments? And if you can explain to the committee, what is your ideology, if you will, of assessing a property? As was indicated to me, a barn in Prince George's County is assessed the same thing as a barn in St. Mary's County. So how are you guys looking at this, and what is how are you doing the assessment?
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Dan Phillips, State Supervisor of Assessments for the Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation. First of all, just remember that this is an ad valorem tax, so it's based on the value of the property. The exception being special use assessments, which we have for agricultural land, along with a couple other categories in the state. But with each of these, we have COMAR. We have certain standards that have been adopted of what qualifies for a farm. And just like we mentioned, we had somebody from the Maryland Horse Council, equine activities are listed in COMAR as an agricultural activity. They are acceptable for any agricultural use. So we have those, that's a qualifying feature, just as raising beef cattle, sheep, pigs, and any of those livestock items are also qualifying items. So that does qualify the property to receive an agricultural assessment. But the structures on any of the farms are all valued based on what features they have. And as we talk about some of these, a property, 2 barns might be different construction types. One is very light construction. It might be fairly cheaply built. We always had run-in sheds on properties that are just designed for brief cover for an animal in bad weather. And that's a lot different than a dairy barn or some other types of barn structures that may have lofts and those other type of features. So when we then look at these properties, we take all those features into consideration, which is the same methodology we do for houses. We look at the features that the property has. We determine a value based on that for the ad valorem purpose. In a couple of these cases, and I'm just going to go over real quickly because we've had some testimony here today. And in each of these cases, I have looked at the property, of the ones that are known to be testified on. The 60 Wine Vineyard, it was an old building that was on the property. It has been renovated to some extent. They've had to add some features that allow it to be used as a tasting room. So you've got to have some plumbing features added. You've got to build it, and it costs money. So when those things happen, they very often, because it's on a farm, it doesn't receive a building permit. When we become aware of it, we add value for those features that have been improvements. The same thing as if you renovate your house, renovate a building on a farm, it changes the value of it. So in that case, we did change the value of the property based on some renovations for that tasting room. There's some area that's not growing crops that's used for parking and so on. But that's something that happens because of the changes in the features of the house or in the building. Mr. Fega has testified today about how much his assessment went up and that there was nothing done. In his case, it was a matter of the farm was not required to get building permits for new construction.
Can I pause you for 1 second? While Dan's talking about this example, we did upload as part of our written testimony a side-by-side aerial shot that was taken from Google Earth that you can see what buildings are new and what buildings used to be there. So that should all be on your laptops, but you can continue, Dan.
So in that case, there was a new 24,000 square foot stable and indoor riding arena built and a couple other buildings replaced. There were no building permits issued for those because they weren't required by the county. So they were there for several years before SDOT found out they were there. And we find out sometimes properties are, when we're doing reassessment, we do not look at every property every year. We look at properties that are issued building permits. So there was not a reason for that. We also look at properties when neighbors call and complain about some activity that's not being assessed, and they state that it's not fair that the other property owner is getting not paying taxes on the buildings that are there. So we did go out, we looked at the buildings, we added the new construction, the new buildings there as part of the reassessment process. The property owner that got the notice, he did appeal it. He came in, said the buildings were older than we initially thought because they had been there a little bit longer. We did adjust the assessment. That appeal process worked the way it was designed to work. But the change in assessment was because buildings were replaced and a new riding arena was built. It was not just that we changed the value of what was already there. They weren't assessed for 7 or 8 years at all.
Let me just ask a question. The methodology in which you all do the assessment, is that on your website or is that anywhere? Because I think what I heard before was if they would have known, then they would have been better prepared for this assessment or this increase. So is there anything that says this is how we assess properties, or this is what you should look for when you do some form of tenant improvement, that these agriculture folks understand when they're starting to improve a barn or whatever, that these are the things that you're going to be looking at?
Most of what we have on our website is really oriented more toward the residential homeowner. I'll tell you that. We have information that states that it'll be reassessed every 3 years, that it'll be based on the current market values, which includes changes in land values. And for each farm, the home site and home are by law required to be valued similar to other homes in the neighborhood. They don't stay the same. They get changed each reassessment cycle, just like any other home in that area.
So maybe that's something that you guys can look at, is how are we getting that information out on the website that is something that is separate and defined for agriculture? I understand the residential homeowner, but maybe we need to put some information on the website where it's readily available for those that are in that specific category where they understand. I think that would also help with communication and information that we could get out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Love this bill. Worked on it last year a little bit, and the conversations that we had last year with SSTAT were that this wasn't happening and that there wasn't assessments being made that were, you know, in the thousands of percents. And it sounds like the tenor has changed to where we're acknowledging that it is happening. So that would indicate to me that there's a change in sort of the normal order of business for these things. I mean, wineries, creameries, we have an apple orchard in our district where you can come and do the corn maze. They've been around for 30 years. So this whole idea of bringing consumers, customers, residents onto the property for financial gain is not something new. However, these escalating assessments are. Yes. And now we have anecdotal that have presented today. I'm sure there's a lot more than just the folks that showed up. So that indicates to me that although the language or the COMAR, all these references that are made haven't changed, the way that you're administering them has. So what, you know, what's the chicken, what's the egg here, and why we're doing this practice differently now in the last 2-3 years?
Thank you for the question. I think from SSTAT's view, the advocates have changed their tone while SSTAT has remained consistent. Okay. So last year, the argument was that SSTAT has changed its methodologies. We said we didn't change our methodologies. This year, they're saying that they need a new tax break. And we're also saying we haven't changed our methodology. So Tax Property Article 5-103 requires each jurisdiction to immediately notify to SSTAT that a building permit has been submitted. However, some jurisdictions do not require building permits for building on agricultural property. Therefore, buildings constructed on agricultural property are not always assessed in a timely fashion because we simply don't know they're there. This leads to a lag in time before a revised assessment is known by the property owner. If you're a property owner and you build something on your property, the value of the property will inherently go up, and so will your assessment. So at the end of the day, if you're putting something new on your property, the value will go up. It's frustrating that we keep hearing that the methodology has changed when it hasn't. The department has also only received 7 examples of properties where an assessment has been changed, according to the advocates. We've looked in all 7. Nothing looks unusual. We haven't been able to, no other examples have been provided to the department outside these 7. 6 of these examples were just provided this week. The department only knew about 1 example throughout this whole process.
Yep, so we tend to think that we know and see all here from Annapolis, but obviously we don't. I'm trying to reconcile 2 statements that were made by your group. One is that we assess properties every 3 years, and one is that we may go 7 or 8 years because we're not being notified by the counties because they don't issue. Got this chain of events that have to occur. So just to clarify that, are you assessing farms every 3 years?
That's a great question. So we assess when a permit is pulled for $100,000 or more, or every 3 years, whichever comes sooner. You want to?
Right. So every property in Maryland is assessed once every 3 years on a rotating cycle.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean we know the changes that have occurred on that property. Because by law, we have to look at properties that have sold, properties that have been issued building permits. If a farm does not get a building permit, we don't have to go look at that by law. We don't have the manpower to look at every single property in the state. So while they get revalued and the agricultural land value stays the same, there may be improvements built that we are unaware of. So that's what happened in the case of the Vega Farm, is that there were improvements there that we were not aware of until somebody said, how come they're not paying their fair share of taxes? And then we.
So in a long enough timeline, all of the farms in Maryland are going to be assessed.
So all farms in Maryland are reassessed every 3 years. The thing is, we don't always capture everything every 3 years because we're not walking around every farm every 3 years. But eventually, if it is, we are made aware by the county, the homeowner, the farm, we're using aerial imaging right now, sometimes we miss something. If an improvement is made to a farm, that improvement will be reflected on the tax bill.
And how are you differentiating? Let's just run with the Google Earth example. How are you differentiating whether or not that qualifies or indicates that that's a non-agricultural or that's commercial? I'm just not understanding the process.
In the event that we are made aware that there's new buildings there, we go physically look at them. We take a tape measure, we measure them, we look at the buildings, we based on the features that are there, we value that property. And when we talked about earlier, somebody mentioned about the percentage increase. We run percentage increase reports for every area that we reassess during reassessment. If we look at, and we all know that the assessments we had a big increase this past year in the assessed values. Right. If a general area, if everything's gone up 12%, we look at anything that's an outlier from that. Not that it's necessarily wrong, but why did it happen? And if we look at it and find that it went up because someone built a new indoor riding arena and stable, that's acceptable increase. If it went up because somebody made a mistake, that's not. So we do check all those percentage increase reports to make sure that everything is consistent within those areas and that there's a reason why something would go up.
Okay, I still don't understand it, but I'm a solutions guy, so I'm going to float a solution out here, and you guys tell me what you think of it. Would you be opposed to a homestead tax credit-esque application to farms so that these farmers could avoid 1,000, 2,000 exorbitant increases in taxes if they are genuinely a farm entity?
So if they're genuinely a farm entity, we want to leave that up to local jurisdictions. The state doesn't want to mandate that for the loss of tax revenue in local jurisdictions, just because they got away with being able to use their property, their improved property all those years. SDAT's not going back and trying to charge them all the years that we could have captured that. We think that type of thing should be up to the local governments.
Okay, well, we have a homestead tax credit, and there's certain criteria, and people have to verify all of that, and there's a long, lengthy process, and they have to meet these criteria. They can't own other homes or apply to other homes. So I'll just repose the question. Does SDAT have any position on a homesteader tax credit to farms?
So we wouldn't be able to take a position on something like that. That would
okay.
What I can tell you is SDAT is worried about whether A, we can implement something, and B, the fiscal note of something.
Okay.
So if this bill is amended to say, if you guys want a new tax credit, and you could say, SDAT, you have 3 years to implement it, we may be able to actually do that. That's part one. And then part two is the fiscal note, and then that part's that we would push it back to the counties to let them make that decision.
And just to be clear, that the study that was done based off the bill last year that was adopted was a recommendation that it be a local tax credit administered by the counties. That'd be the way it be handled. That way it's up to the counties. The definitions of an farm alcohol production facility, of the agricultural activities for corn mazes, that type of thing, those are voluntary definitions. They can be adopted by a county. They're not mandated in the land use article. So that's part of why the recommendation was.
This bill would mandate the counties to adopt those optional definitions.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Delegate Long and then Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What about the cost approach? Do you guys consider that agricultural buildings used for commercial use? Do you consider that as their income? Do you base your assessment on that?
That's primarily what is used as a cost approach. We do adapt that to, based on what's there. The question came up about the farm produce stands. Very often, they're a building that is 4 poles, 6 poles, 8 poles, and a roof, maybe a back wall. Most of those cases, it costs money to put there. We don't even assess them. They don't really add value to the overall property. They're used on a seasonal basis. They're cheap construction. So we don't add anything to the assessment for most of those. When we get into situations with large buildings that have refrigeration, have
Indoor
plumbing that maybe they're selling, deck furniture among other things with things, then it's a different story because we do feel that they add value to the property. But they are based off, first and foremost, looking at the cost approach of what features that they have.
I'm sorry, maybe I misspoke. Not the cost approach, the income approach. Like, what are they actually bringing in a year? Do you guys consider that as far as assessing the buildings?
No, it really, it does not matter to us whether they generate a little bit of money from that building. It's what's the building? What's the walls, the floors, the electrical, the plumbing system? What's that worth? Because the use of what they're selling can be vastly different. As we talk about wineries, you can have a $6 bottle of wine or a $600 bottle of wine selling out of the same building. We're not going to change the assessment if they're selling $600 bottles of wine.
I'll give an example, Delegate Long. If you go to a Whole Foods versus an Aldi, Whole Foods can be much more expensive, your total grocery bill, than at an Aldi. If the buildings are constructed the same and appear the same, their assessments are going to be the same, even though the Whole Foods might be producing a higher dollar amount of a product.
So, and last question, if you went with their income approach, would that give any relief to these farmers?
It would likely increase the assessments.
Okay, I'm good then. Thank you.
Delegate Miller?
Okay, I'm good. All right. I'm having trouble wrapping my head around some of the things that you're saying. When you use words like got away with, that kind of phrase, I take a little bit of exception to, because I don't think anyone is trying to get away with something when they're improving their property and then they get 15 years later, they get an increase in the tax bill. So I don't think they're trying to get away with anything, in my opinion. The other thing is, so in the event, another thing you said is in the event we are made aware. And you're saying that you're assessing these properties every 3 years, or unless you're made aware that something changed on these property by someone telling you, or all the other things that you said. What is a reasonable expectation? Because I'm trying to get to the fairness of this. You said you're not going to these properties and walking around. So that leads me to 2 questions. You're not going to, so you're making an assessment based on how much property values have gone up in the areas. Is that how you're making these assessments when you're making these increases, when you're not actually going and walking around and Google Earthing them or whatever you're doing?
Most of what you're talking about, the land values for the farms are not changing. They're set in COMAR. They're staying the same from reassessment cycle to reassessment cycle. We've looked at, for the home site and the houses, we've looked at other properties that have homes and home sites in the area that have sold. So that part changes based on what is happening in the real estate market for homes. As far as the buildings.
But farms don't go up. So farms don't go up every 3 years.
Just typically the house and the home site.
So
on the farm.
On the farm.
So there's currently an agricultural land rate, which is typically 5 to 10% of market value. That's how we value the land. This bill uses a term called agricultural use rate that we were not familiar with. So we're assuming that's the same as the agricultural land rate. And that would basically assess improvements at 5 to 10% of the market value.
Okay, so, all right, I'm following all that. So what is a normal expectation for that person who is living on that farm, who owns that farm, of how many cycles that it would go through before they would see this? Like, so is it like, okay, it was for this, I'm assuming that they know, because I'm going to assume that if you're doing an assessment that you know what's going on around the property, and that's why I'm getting this. So I'm going on the assumption of good intentions that we like to have around here, and that they know that. So how many cycles would you normally expect for that to go through before they would see that increase? What's fair to you?
Did the person pull a permit in your example, or did they build without a
They
permit?
did not, because evidently with ag use, they did not have to, so, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, but they're not doing anything illegal,
Correct.
they're just improving their property.
And that is something I will say, when I started 34 years ago, we had almost 2.5 times the number of assessors. We looked at every property every year, or every 3 years. So we did go down. I've walked around many farms, doing reassessments. As budget cuts have occurred over the year, we're down to about 45% of that number, 40% of that number of what we had 30 years ago. We cannot physically do that.
And I'm understanding that, but they don't know that.
Right. So typically, that farm, the home site may change from a reassessment cycle, because we have gone out, we've measured the houses, we know what was there when we last visited the farm. Those things we take into consideration. If somebody tears something down, they typically tell us. They don't always tell us when they build something. But once again, as we find something, and it's either through a regular reassessment cycle, and that can be just that there's a house that we have to look at.
Okay, but what's a fair number? I understand that, but what's a fair number of how many assessments? Are you saying there's no fair number, so it could be like 6 assessments go by?
Ideally, we would like to be able to do it every cycle. But at the same time, if we're not aware that something was built, should it be forever banished from the tax rolls?
I think it's getting to what Delegate Barnes was making the point about. There's a fairness aspect to me about this. And so I think we have to resolve this part of it.
And there is something the tax property article specifically states, there's a section titled escape property. By law, the department, if we find something that was there, we can adjust it for the current year and 3 prior years, and have the county send a tax bill for 3 prior years. So that's what we could have done on the Fega property. We did not do it because we didn't really feel it was fair. I mean, we could do it if we felt it was intentional that they tried to escape this. But the bottom line is they don't have to get a building permit. We as a department, as an administrative policy, so we will adjust it for the next reassessment cycle going forward when something is discovered that's been there for a while, because we feel that's the fair way to treat the people.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay, wait, can I, just one more. It's not about that.
This is the last and final question.
Last and final.
And then this bill is done.
So your Whole Foods and your Aldi's example, they are identically built, but one is located in Frederick County, one is located in Baltimore County, and one is located out in Allegheny or Garrett County. That they're equal buildings, you said they're equal size, they should have equal value. We're not talking about production or anything like that. Are they going to have an equal assessment?
No.
No, I mean, typically because of the difference in land values in those different locations, not necessarily the building value itself, but because of land values.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no
Thank
more
you, Madam Chair.
questions, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 592. 2 more bills, folks. House Bill 779, Delegate Buckle, and there are 8 witnesses.
The panel people just come up now to
Absolutely.
speed time. Fantastic.
And while they're coming up, committee members and subcommittee chairs, we are not meeting in back room, but we'll see everybody at our event tonight.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. For the record, Delegate Jason Buckle, this is House Bill 779. Fellow members of the Ways and Means Committee, these are the bills you have been waiting for all day long. I can sense the palpable sense of excitement in the room as we approach hour 4 of our discussion of tax assessment and tax sale law. This bill, 779, is sort of an amalgamation or a combination of a couple of prior concepts of bills that were offered by Senator Edwards last year in the Senate. They come to us from the very considered efforts of, frankly, the city of Cumberland and the city of Hagerstown. Many of you from larger urban areas, I know Delegate Barnes, Delegate Wilkins, and others, Delegate Jones is actually from the Cumberland area. Delegate Grossman is here representing the city of Hagerstown. Sometimes folks from the I-95 corridor believe that in Western Maryland we don't have cities, and that's not really true. Both the city of Cumberland and the city of Hagerstown are urban environments. You know, they're not as large as the city of Baltimore. They are not as sort of suburban developed as a Rockville or a Gaithersburg. but they are not rural. They are not really purely suburban. They are urban environments, and they have some of the problems of urban blight and dilapidated properties that get caught up in the tax sale process. And what I think you'll see if you look at some of the testimony is referred to as zombie properties. There are properties that exist that are not very well maintained that the city would like to, the cities, any city, would like to do something about in terms of remedying or rectifying and getting the property back to something that is productive. And the problem becomes the owner doesn't pay the taxes because it's probably not owner occupied. Maybe they're renting it out. Maybe they don't even live there. The tax sale certificate purchaser doesn't really follow through with the tax sale certificate purchase. And the city wants to come in and be able to do something more effective with the properties, and they cannot establish clear legal title. 779 essentially combines 3 elements. It allows the county or the municipality to petition a court to be assigned the certificate of sale, the tax sale certificate for the property, or to take title to the property if the tax sale certificate holder has not done what they're legally obligated and entitled to do in the process. They have not taken title to the property. They have not foreclosed what we call the right of redemption for the original title holder who did not pay the taxes. They have not gotten a final order of the court so that they have a deed vested in these municipalities, and these code compliance folks can now go to them and say, hey, that's your obligation. The roof's falling down. It's your obligation. You're creating a nuisance for our cities. You have to do something about it. What happens in a lot of these situations is people just shrug their shoulders. Not me. I don't own it anymore. You got to talk to the tax sale certificate holder. The tax sale certificate holder says, oh, I never actually foreclosed on the right of redemption. I don't legally own it either. Tough luck, city. You know, put it back on the tax sale list 2-3 years from now. So there's that element. There's also the element of the bill that would allow a county or municipality to withhold from tax sale. We've had a lot of bills about that, the ability to withhold from tax sale a property that contains a vacant building or a structure that the governmental body intends to demolish because it's unsafe for habitation. It is a house that is essentially falling down in some form or shape, but there is still a tax sale process, and someone may hold a tax sale certificate, and these guys want to come in and streamline the process so that they can make it safe and that they can redevelop the urban blight. And essentially, those are the 2 main elements of the bill. In addition, it allows the governmental body, the county or the municipality, to come in and make a motion with the court, because all these tax sale procedures are governed by courts. They're not done out in the ether. And that would say, hey, we can get a certificate vested in us, title vested in the city, if within 90 days the holder of the certificate of sale does not comply with the terms of the final judgment. That's a lot of legalese to basically say, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, if you don't do what we give you the entitlement to do, and you create this zombie property situation, these municipalities or other governmental bodies, as necessary, have the ability to cut through all the red tape to come in and take title to these properties for the purposes of restoring them and rectifying urban blight and nuisance conditions. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll certainly turn it over. I have Mr. Cohen, who is the city solicitor for both the city of Cumberland and the city of Frostburg. I have the city of Frostburg's mayor, Mr. Flanagan, and the city of Cumberland's mayor, Mr. Morris, that are here today.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Michael Scott Cohen. I'm the attorney for the city of Frostburg and also city solicitor for the city of Cumberland. Delegate Buckle has taken a lot of the testimony that I would have given, and I thank him for that because it makes life a little bit easier for me. But the crux of the measures that relate to zombie properties is that you sort of have you do have a 2-stage approach to dealing with the properties. One is, and they both occur during the course of a tax sale foreclosure. First, you have cases that are pending but have been abandoned by the original tax sale purchaser. And then you've got cases that have wended their way all the way through the process. You've come to the point where you've got a final order that's been issued by the court. The tax sale purchaser is then supposed to pay the taxes, the interest, the balance of the purchase price, if any, and then present the deed to the tax collector. Then the tax collector signs the deed, transfers title to the tax sale purchaser. Well, when you have property that's abandoned midstream, of course, the case doesn't get concluded. Then when you have a property that's abandoned at the very end, the property stays in sort of this limbo where it's owned by the owner, who's now gone, and the tax sale purchaser has done nothing to take ownership, take responsibility for the property. Thus, you have what is a zombie property that's essentially going nowhere. Local governments have no means to address the problems that are located in those properties. Now, just to touch on a couple points that the delegate did not mention, is that these tax sale purchasers who are foreclosing, they don't automatically lose their rights. Rather, local government has to file a motion asking for the relief, and then the tax sale purchaser, the foreclosing party, has the opportunity to show cause why local government shouldn't be granted the relief that they're seeking. I would note that this bill harms no one. Owners retain all of the rights they have in a tax sale foreclosure case, and the foreclosing plaintiffs lose nothing. They have all the rights that they would have had, but for the fact that the cases have been abandoned. However, I would note that this bill affords substantial benefits.
Sir. Please wrap up.
Substantial benefits to local governments. They can do something about it now. Done. Thank you.
I'm Ray Morris. I'm the mayor of Cumberland, and I want to thank you all for allowing me to testify today here. Vice Chair, Madam Vice Chair Wilkins, thank you for this opportunity. This bill is about blighted property, and blighted property is something that is a great issue in the city of Cumberland. The last time we did a study was back in 2019. Had 512 blighted properties in the city of Cumberland. Last year, I saw a report from the city of Baltimore. They had between 11,000 and 13,000 blighted properties that are in situations like this. I give the mayor of Baltimore kudos for taking that on. But this is about blighted properties, and this is, as the delegate and legal counsel explained, this is about a way to expedite the handling of these properties. You know, the key to it with these is that, as the counselor said, a lot of the times these are properties that are going to have to be torn down. What we really want to do, in fact, is to get to them before they have to be torn down, and to be able to help to revitalize our communities and revitalize our neighborhoods. You know, one property on a street that's blighted like this takes down the property values of every house on that street, every house in that neighborhood. So that's truly what the mechanism is for, is to be able to help us revitalize our streets and our communities. I'd ask for your support on House Bill 779 and a favorable report. Thank you. You got anything? No. We're good.
All right, thank you. And I was able to visit the beautiful city of Cumberland over the interim, so welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for this panel? All right, hearing none. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
All right, I'll now call up Heidi Kenny, Ari Plout, Frank Boston, Bob Yeager, and Jonathan Glaser.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. I had originally signed up to testify in favor with amendments, but we have worked with Michael Cohen on this bill since the beginning, so we have no further amendments, and I would just request a favorable report.
Thank you so much. And I should mention, colleagues, that this entire panel is signed up as favorable with amendment. Next.
Madam Chair.
If you can. Yep, there we go.
There you go. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Frank Boston III. I am here on behalf of the law firm of Heidi Kenny. The Kenny Law Firm, which is Heidi's firm, and also the Maryland's Tax Sales Participants Association. And we support the bill as drafted. I just want to tell the committee that I want to thank Mr. Cohen and the two mayors that are here from Cumberland and Frostburg and the whole Western Maryland Coalition that are behind these bills. Last year, there were 6 bills, and they came in late, and we opposed them, and they died. This year, Mr. Cohen and his coalition reached out to us in September. We spent many hours working through some of the issues we had. We had the same common goal, and as a result, we're all on the same page. And I just want to thank the proponents of this bill for reaching out. That's the way it should be.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, have you testified yet?
I have, I'm sorry.
Okay, we're gonna let the other individuals testify. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, Jonathan Glazer, Legislative Director for the Department of Assessments and Taxation. I also have with me Bob Yeager, the Tax Sale Ombudsman, who will be available for questions. The department is in support with amendments on this legislation. The department suggests an amendment to give a property owner the opportunity to exercise their right to file a motion to strike foreclosure and pay off their lien before the county's new right to the same filing created in this bill kicks in. Currently, when the lien purchaser fails to take title 90 days after the foreclosure, the homeowner gains the right to move to strike the foreclosed judgment. This clears the way for the homeowner to pay off the balance and clear the title. House Bill 779 would give local jurisdictions the same right after the same 90 days. While this bill does prevent the county from moving to strike in favor if the homeowner has already entered a motion first, it'll be a race to the courthouse after 90 days, and the homeowner won't likely move as quickly as the county. To give property owners the first chance to maintain ownership, SSTAT urges an amendment for the bill on page 3, line 25, from 90 to 180 days at least, so that the homeowner has the first opportunity to submit a motion to strike before the county gains that right. And with those amendments, the department will support the legislation, and Bob Yeager is here for any questions.
Thank you so much. Did I miss Ari Plout?
I'm here in place of
Okay, I understand.
Yep.
All right, I think we've heard from everyone. Any questions for this panel? All right, seeing none, this panel is excused. Thank you. I believe that ends the hearing for HB 779. We are now going to call up Delegate Buckle again, HB 780. And I have here for in-person oral, Raymond Morris, Robert Flanagan, Michael Cohen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is, again, Delegate Jason Buckle, HB 780. This is the other piece of the packet of bills that was referenced, I believe, by Mr. Boston, that was initiated by the municipalities in Western Maryland, including Cumberland, Hagerstown, and Frostburg, which are probably the three largest municipalities in the state west of Frederick. HB 780 has essentially two primary components. Number one is it would treat for effective purposes as a, in the same category as a tax for a potential for a tax lien for real property maintenance or nuisance condition violations of law that are reduced to a final judgment. So what does that mean for non-lawyers? It means that you live in a municipality, there's a nuisance code that says, you know, you must maintain some particular aspect of your property. You get a warning, you get a second warning. Generally, I think Mr. Cohen would tell you that you get third and fourth warnings. You know, usually they try hard to work with you about it, and no one responds, typically because it's one of these zombie property situations and no one has the responsibility to fix it. And eventually the municipality or the political subdivision files a municipal infractions case, which is typically heard in the district courts of the state of Maryland all over the state. The district court judge gives you an opportunity to come in and defend yourself. It's not criminal, obviously. If you choose not to do so, or they determine that you have committed an infraction of sort of these real property maintenance or nuisance conditions, you can have a monetary judgment in the form of a fine entered against you, and it becomes the same effect as a civil judgment. What you can't do, I think you'll find what the municipalities can't do, or the other subdivisions, they can't actually collect or force you to actually make the repairs because there's very little enforcement mechanism for it. So this element of this bill would include those types of situations where a final judgment has been rendered and allow them to generate the same effect as a tax sale as if you had not paid. If you owed $500 in taxes, $1,000 in taxes you had not paid. If you have fines amounting to that amount for the failure to maintain your property, it would be categorized the same way and would give the municipalities the opportunity to try to remedy these blighted properties rather than just let them sit there forever. The second element is a more local element. Again, we tried to combine some of these bills so you didn't all have to hear 7 different bills. The second element of this bill is localized to Allegheny and Washington County, and it essentially allows for the counties or the municipalities organized within those counties to file the complaint to foreclose right of redemption for the properties to which it holds a certificate of sale at any time after the sale and without going through the very, very lengthy process. Because again, the municipalities don't get the tax sale certificate unless it's one of these circumstances where it's a blighted property. They're not investors, they're not developers, they're not in the same posture as the tax sale certificate holders that we hear from frequently with Ms. Kenny and Mr. Boston. They have a completely different objective. When they already have the tax sale certificate, it's already usually a blighted property, and they're looking to more quickly move forward while still giving adequate ability for someone who really wants to protect and keep the property. They can come in and bring it up to code, pay the taxes, pay the fines. They're going to get a chance to do that. We're never going to steal that from them. But if they're just not going to do it, the municipality should not have to sit and wait, and a year goes by and 2 years go by before they can actually effectuate the type of urban renewal. So those are the two elements, primary elements of this particular legislation, and we would hope that the committee would consider them favorably. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, my name is Michael Cohen. I'm the city solicitor for the city of Cumberland and also the municipal attorney for the city of Frostburg. I'd like to thank the delegate for his wonderful testimony. Seeing as I couldn't have said it any better than he did, I'd just like to thank him again, and that's all I have to say.
Once again, I'm Ray Morris. I'm the mayor of Cumberland. I think we got that part figured out. And thank you, Jason, because I think you stated it very succinctly and did a great job and kept me from having to pay my attorney too much more money. So thanks. So thank you very much. Oh, don't worry. He's unpaid till he gets back to Cumberland, and that's tomorrow. We're testifying tomorrow at the Senate. No, seriously, I'm sorry, I shouldn't do that. Seriously, thank you all once again for hearing our testimony. Really appreciate your favorable support of these bills. Thank you.
Okay, a few questions for this panel, Delegate Polakovich-Carr and then Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Buckle. Since I have to phrase this as a question, would you be willing to work with me just to make sure that the provisions that are defining what a nuisance condition is are sufficiently tight? I just flagged that since there are some jurisdictions that include like calls for police service as a nuisance, and it's not just limited to property state of repair.
Sure. I think, and I'm positive that that's what the intent of these particular municipalities that brought it forth is really to get to things that are blighted properties as opposed to the apartments, because there might have a situation that you've talked about in other bills. I think we'd be happy to exclude that from the conditions that would create the municipal infractions.
Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is really just about sort of the approach identifying these two jurisdictions in terms of, was there a specific rationale why you didn't want to approach this as a statewide bill, and this is sort of local, buy local?
Right.
Has it been through these two delegations? Or?
Yes, and as you can see, Delegate Grossman and I are the two sponsors of the bill.
Yes.
I think, to be honest with you, Delegate Feldmark, that was more of a strategic concern as opposed to a legalistic or policy concern. That we knew that these two particular jurisdictions and the primary municipalities housed within them were seeking the legislation, and we didn't want to get in a situation. Baltimore City is an interesting place. It's a city, it's a county. They have a lot of peculiarities with respect to tax sales. There are some rules. My understanding, and I don't purport to be an expert, but my understanding is you cannot pass specific rules just for a municipality. But Baltimore City, because it is also technically not really a county, but one of our, it's not just a city within a county, they can be addressed differently. What we wanted to avoid was getting tripped up into a situation where there may be a municipality out there, whether it be the city or not, who didn't want to do it this way. And we didn't want to force that upon them, but we wanted Allegheny County and Washington County's municipalities to have the opportunity to reach that policy result.
Thank you.
Absolutely correct on that. And as you will note, it does have the support of MML, so I think in the future you may see other municipalities, other counties going forward to add this to their ability.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? Seeing none, thank you to this panel. Thank you. We do have some signed up favorable with amendment. Heidi Kenny, Ari Plout, Frank Boston, Bob Yeager, and Jonathan Glaser. I think the same panel from the last one.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm here on behalf of Ari Plout, Heidi Kenny. Same testimony we support. We thank this group for inviting us to be a part of the shaping of this bill. No amendments. We've talked in the hall. We're good.
All right. Well, feel free to have a seat in case there are any questions. Other testimony.
And good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair. Again, Jonathan Glaser, Legislative Director for the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. And still hanging on is Bob Yeager, the Tax Sale Ombudsman, who's here for any questions that you might have. The department is support with amendments on this bill. The department supports the desire of the counties to expedite the process of returning nuisance properties to productive use. However, notice is an important part of any governmental action, and notice to a property owner of an action as serious as a foreclosure should not be waived when it may only add 60 days to the process. Current law would already allow the counties to initiate the bill's proposed foreclosure 60 days after a tax sale if they sent a first notice immediately after the sale and a second notice 30 days later. When a property is vacant, current law also would already permit the counties to foreclose without prior notice after the tax sale. Waiving the foreclosure notice requirement for properties that are not designated vacant would give a homeowner very little opportunity to prepare to defend against the foreclosure or to assemble the funds or access assistant resources to pay off the county debt to avoid the foreclosure. Thus, the department suggests striking out the final provision in this bill that permits the county to foreclose without prior notice. With these amendments, the department will support this legislation. Again, Bob Yeager is here for any questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, that ends the bill hearing on HB 780. There are no virtual witnesses, and that ends the bill hearings for today. Well, before everyone departs, if there are subcommittee chairs who have any announcements.
Revenues will meet tomorrow, immediately after floor session tomorrow. So we have it scheduled for 11:30, but immediately after floor session by Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Education Subcommittee will meet around noon, but probably following Revenue Subcommittee tomorrow.
Okay, and I can speak for Election Law Subcommittee. We're going to meet on Thursday, immediately after floor. Thursday, immediately after floor, Election Law. Delegate Polakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Early Childhood is meeting on Thursday at 12:30.
Okay, there we have it. We'll see everyone at 6:30. Enjoy.